My guy.
So excited to be here.
Welcome to Seeking Excellence.
Couldn't be more excited to be here.
It's really, really incredible. And, I was looking up on the way here, actually, which is not good because I was driving myself. But at a stoplight that we hit, I was looking at when the first podcast came out, like first one ever, because I was like, it'd be pretty epic if we'd met before, like, podcasts existed. Unfortunately, we were off for like 3 years. Like they said the first, they called it like an audio blog or something, came out in 2003. But then in 2004 was the first time that we know that like the term podcast was used.
That sounds like fake news, but yeah, sure.
It does. But what I did realize in doing that was that we met 16 years ago and we're 30 years old. And so I don't feel like we acknowledge properly that we've known each other for more than half our lives at this point.
Well, praise God. We all have our own crosses to bear, and I guess this is ours.
Yeah, specifically yours. But it's great to have you here. I know we want to do this for a long time. For a lot of people who don't know, when Seeking Excellence was started, it was like a nonprofit corporation. It wasn't 501c3, but I didn't know what I was doing with my life. And I had a board of 3 people.
3 or 4, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was, yeah. No, I mean, I think it was just you 3. I hope I'm not forgetting somebody that still like listens to the podcast. But Bill Baird, you, Father Meyer.
Father Chase wasn't involved?
Father Chase was the chaplain, technically.
Okay, got it.
But please believe Father Chase is going to listen to this. So shout out to Father Chase.
Shout out Father Chase.
He's our chaplain. He probably still prays for us as much as anybody. And so he's still serving in his role as chaplain by praying for us and listening in. So, yeah, so it's crazy. So you were there, but going back to where we met in high school, obviously. I often talk about you, introduce you as my best friend from high school. And yeah, it's crazy to think of where we are today.
Go Crusaders.
Go Crusaders. So yeah, met at Bishop McDevitt High School in 2007. And you've done a lot with your life, and I'm really proud of you. It's been fun getting to be at, different phases of each other's lives, getting to celebrate that together. But first, I just always like to open up with, tell us a little bit about yourself. There's people out there who don't know who you are, even though you're pretty famous now. And so, which is why it was so hard to get you on here,
Well, I'll never claim that. And I think mostly a result of just laziness on your part is what I'm going to throw it up for. But
I respect that.
I'm really excited to be here. I just want to say I'm incredibly proud of you and everything you've accomplished.
Thank you.
It is a real honor to be here. And especially looking back, I'm sure as we'll get into the long journey we've both taken to end up here, just really exciting and humbling to be here. So, yeah, I grew up Alessandro DiSanto. As you can tell from my name, big Italian-American family. My mom was born and raised in Italy. My dad is Italian, 2 generations back. And so grew up in a very culturally Italian family, kind of on both sides of my family. I had a couple dozen cousins, all within a 30-minute drive, kind of neighbors, same neighborhood, everything. On my mom's side, my mom, aunts and uncles ran pizza shops. So I kind of grew up in that environment. My grandparents, my mom's parents moved in when I was born and never learned English. And so I grew up with Italian in the house. My dad's family, grandparents also within a couple minute drive. So just had a really, really wonderful, happy and privileged childhood. Grew up in central Pennsylvania, a lot of love. I grew up Italian Catholic, sometimes in that order.
Sure.
But Catholic grade school, high school.
Go Jets.
Go Jets. Holy name of Jesus, Jets. And Bishop McDevitt High School, as you said, and always gravitated towards the intellectual life, and so kind of did well in school, played some sports as well, but very clubs, academically oriented. Kind of found my way to Notre Dame on accident. Was not one of these people that kind of grew up in fighting Irish onesies growing up, but kind of ended up in Indiana. Former priest where we grew up, ended up being ordained bishop in Harrisburg, and then transferred over to Fort Wayne, South Bend, and he kind of made me apply, and I wanted to stay on the East Coast for college, but ended up getting into Notre Dame. That was the best place I got into, and so I ended up going there. Tried a lot of different things while at school. I think a normal course load most colleges kind of 5 courses, 3 credits each, kind of 15 credits. I took 21 credits each of my first 6 semesters. I was really kind of all over the place. Just really enjoying kind of diving into the different disciplines, but ultimately caught the finance bug through some classes and also extracurriculars. Started a career on Wall Street, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. And then I kind of was in the midst of that had a series of kind of life-changing experiences, discovering a daily prayer life, and then ultimately led to, alongside with Alex, Eric, and the founding team at Hallow, kind of walking in one day and quitting. And past 5 years have been kind of helping people pray at Hallow.
Yeah, that's amazing. And did you know when you got to Notre Dame, did you have an idea of what you wanted to study, or were you still like very up in the air and taking a bunch of different stuff?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small business household. I kind of talked about my mom's side and my dad's side, kind of construction company, real estate company. And so always kind of grew up in kind of a small, medium business entrepreneurial household. And so my parents were always kind of very encouraging of exploring business. And I naturally gravitated towards that as an interest.
Yeah.
But I was also considering things like law school, I was considering grad school. I minored in Italian, mostly because I thought it would be easy and helpful. I could tutor all the cute girls that wanted to study Italian so that they could study abroad in Rome. I ended up getting bumped up a couple levels within the first 10 minutes of my first class and ended up doing some intensive kind of medieval literature stuff. And so
in Italian.
Yeah. So
Wow.
I went pretty deep on Dante and some of the
No kidding.
late
Wow.
medieval, early Renaissance stuff. Took architectural physics, kind of dabbled with kind of the physics area. And so I really was kind of wide open. I tended to like all of my non-finance classes more intellectually, but then kind of as I got more in kind of the applied projects, really like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so with Italian, for people that don't know your background, tell us about the small Italian boy that struggled in school when he first got put into an English-speaking school.
Yeah, so I grew up, my grandparents, as I mentioned, kind of lived with us. And so, my mom worked in the pizza shop. My dad was working with my uncle in real estate construction business. And so I learned primarily Italian growing up. And my dad came home the one day and saw my grandmother kind of playing with me on the floor with like Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And she was like, "Oh, questo Pasquale, Giuseppe," and like making up all these Italian names for the stuffed animals. She didn't realize they were, characters. And my dad was like, "Look, we gotta teach this kid at least the right Disney characters. This is pre-woke Disney." So
that's right.
So depending on who you ask,
that was some woke Disney. That's right.
So I went to preschool basically, and not really being able to effectively communicate with my peers. And so that was fun. Shout out Matthew Kirshner, my first friend.
Wow.
Kind of played blocks with me, and we figured out some English together, which was
helped you to figure it out.
Yeah.
Praise God. That's amazing. And so one question that I've wanted to ask you, and I know I didn't give you much of an outline before we started this, but this isn't something that's going to shock you, I don't think. But one thing I've wanted to give people, because some people have listened to me for 3 years now, and I feel like they hear from a lot of people who know me from the last year, 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years. You knew me 60 years ago, as we said. Now, in as charitable as a version as you can, how would you describe young Nathan Crankfield?
Well, as Father Chase would say, clarity is charity. So I certainly don't want to, pull too many punches.
That's right.
And for anyone that's been around since the first podcast episode and is still with you, I would assume they're going to spend very little time in purgatory. So
that's for sure. And they're not going to nothing's going to be a surprise to them.
That's right.
They've heard the stories.
That's a good point. So I would say that it's fair to say that you were a very socially oriented individual in high school. Athletic, if I had to, ballpark it, I'd say probably 50, 60 pounds ago. So I know we're in the podcast environment, but
that is accurate.
Painting a picture.
Yep.
Great on the basketball court.
Yep.
I would say maybe prioritized more the relationship building aspects of the high school development more than the academic development, at least for the initial phases. I would say though,
I think that exists all the way through. I don't think that changed till college.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah. I would say though, whereas maybe your stereotypical approach to that would be at the extreme, a disdain or a less thinking of other people lesser than on the academic side. I would say that you were honestly someone that kind of friends with everyone. And so not just kind of like your class clown type of person, but, we developed a friendship in the midst of that. And I was certainly spending a lot more time in the books than on the streets, as they say. But yeah, really positive, involved in a few things kind of club wise. Right. And we got to know each other through student government. I won't throw you too much under the bus here.
You can tell the story.
We were kind of together throughout this student government journey up until senior year. I was class president, kind of coming out of freshman year, sophomore year, junior year, and then when we went for the senior year school-wide president,
you decided to swing big.
Really took the big swing. Felt I was ready for that, and you at the time were kind of confused in your relationship with high school romance, and allowed that to kind of guide you in an alternative ticket, which then kind of ended my streak. Really kind of brought a little bit of humility to my life, which you've always been good at, and kind of refocusing me on that king of all the virtues. And that worked out interestingly for your ticket over the course of the year. But yeah, I had to sit out the sidelines
that it did,
student government wise.
Yeah, that's really
you
funny.
won. I'll just make that clear. I won't talk about it. You beat me in student government.
Confusion there. Which I think I would have lost. I think I would have lost had it just been the seniors.
Mm.
But I had the love of the freshmen through juniors pretty locked down, I think.
I think the results speak for themselves. We did get to spend some time on homecoming court together. That was fun.
We did.
It was a great time.
We did. We had a very diverse friend group in high school.
We did.
Yeah, and I don't mean diverse in just like diversity quotas like black-white ratio, which it did have as well, but more just diverse. I mean, even if you think today, like what everybody's doing, like where people are at, we have like your lukewarm kind of Catholic raising kids to totally rejected the faith, still single, like pothead, to conservative, very liberal, you know what I mean? Like all kinds of different professions, just kind of all over the map, which is really, really interesting.
Athletes, non-athletes.
Athletes, non-athletes, torn Achilles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. But I think, when I think back to high school, I just think it's funny. It's funny to me with our friendship, and I think just in life, right, with some of the people you've known for a long time, how like we've changed so much, but so much is the same.
Yep.
I think that's something that's so beautiful. I was just talking, so I'm doing a book club right now for the Screw Tape Letters for like Seeking Excellence supporters. And I'm doing a video every day from Monday through Friday, just a 10-minute video on a different chapter each day. And the one I just finished recording was talking about how the demons try to convince us that when you abandon yourself as God asks us to his will, that we will lose ourselves. But he talks about how the reality is that God makes us even more fully ourselves than we've ever been or would ever be capable of being without him. And I think that's something that's so true, and I think comes through in friendships like ours, where we've let go of a lot of, thanks be to God, vices and things like that. But there is something that always does stick and remain the same in a sense because of that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the truth permeates itself. And I think when you are kind of grounded in that same journey towards kind of good ends, that you become both more joined in kind of the oneness of the body of the church, right? Mm-hmm. Which we've certainly grown in over the past couple of years together. But it even feels, like you said, kind of more like yourself in a way that you would not have necessarily felt possible or thought. And I'm sure we'll talk about in terms of my journey of like letting go who I thought I wanted to be in Wall Street and all these things. You feel like you're going to lose so much, but then your cup becomes so much more full than you could have ever experienced. And I think each in our own ways have really felt that in our own individual personal lives, obviously with family, through marriage, through fatherhood. I think each progressive letting go and further surrender of personal desire and alignment to God's will kind of makes the cup even bigger, and it continues to overflow.
Yeah, it's super interesting. So another question I've always wanted to ask you, and this kind of along the same thing that I want to jump to your story, is when do you remember like hearing about me going through my conversion? Do you remember like a first time where it was like, oh, Nate's getting more into his faith? Like that's something that I don't know about from other people's perspective in my life who knew me before.
Yeah.
Of like when it became apparent to other people from Harrisburg that I was like going through this deep life change at the Mount. And I don't remember how like vocal I was about it. I don't remember personally like when I started to change in what I was doing, And so I was curious from your perspective. And I don't think I've ever really asked anybody that, but like, when do you recall, was it like into the Army, or was it during college, after the Army? Like, when did you kind of realize like, oh, Nate's taking his faith more seriously?
Yeah. So I've obviously heard you talk about it since then, kind of in Hallow context, but looking back kind of at the time, certainly not during high school. And I think the first time I have a conscious memory of it is senior year. I was doing a road trip over spring break. I drove down to Georgia, or maybe it was fall break, because we drove down to Florida State Notre Dame game. I think Alex and I, and then he flew somewhere. And I drove up to Atlanta, see Sam's family, my now wife, then girlfriend, and then I drove up and I was passing through the Mount. And I stopped in for like a few hours to say hello. Then I was going home, staying with my grandmother. She was still alive at the house. My parents were away. She was alone. And then drove back to South Bend. So like in a week, I drove like 3,500 miles or something.
Yeah, you got it.
And so in those few hours that I was at the Mount from like, I don't know, 6 p.m. to 9 or 10 p.m., you were telling me that you were leading, I think, some men's groups or giving some talks on campus related to faith. Yeah. And to be honest, at the time I was like, really?
That's it makes sense.
That was a surprise. And I know obviously you were preparing, you kind of in RTC obviously at that point, and kind of preparing for active duty. And so I remember thinking about not really knowing exactly how much of that was faith centric versus kind of preparing for, let's say, like full on manhood. Yeah. Kind of like just men's virtue talk versus kind of deep faith growth. But that's the first time that I remember that.
That's funny. Yeah. And my senior year, what's funny to me is I like very vividly remember like spiritually where I was each year, you know, and just this kind of like curiosity of freshman year and then into sophomore year, where it was like, just like really finding how to build the foundation, you know, it was just really like seeking. Went from curiosity to like actively seeking out the answers to the questions that I was curious about. And then junior year, feeling like I had it under control and like seeing fruits of the things I was doing in the Bible studies and talks I was giving, etc. And then senior year, just being infused with such a deeper humility that really like took me to another level of maturity spiritually, you know? And so, yeah, it's really interesting. That's funny to think about, but I just always wondered that, you know, of like, and I'm sure for different people, it'd be different stages and times, but that's hilarious that I don't even remember that story. I don't even remember you visiting there at the Mount. But
that makes me feel warm and fuzzy.
I guess you didn't make a lasting impression. I do remember visiting you our senior year.
Yeah.
But that's great. That's super helpful. And I think one thing that, and we can transition talking, I want to talk about your conversion story, your reversion story. I know a lot of people call it when you Catholic, like you've been Catholic your whole life, but I think The Chosen does an exceptional job of something you just pointed out, which is showing people who are known to be ratchet, known to have a certain reputation. And then it's like people have to see them changed and like in charge of things, like entrusted by God with different things. And one of my favorite, I don't know if I've ever quoted it in front of you, 1 Timothy 1:12-16, one of my favorite parts in that passage is St. Paul says, it's true that Jesus Christ came down to save sinners, among whom I am the worst. But he's like, but God chose me as the worst to use me to show his perfect patience to those who believe in for eternal life. Now it's paraphrasing, but I think there's so much beauty to that. And I really relate to that when I was in college and memorized it then, because I had people from college. This is like when I was much less terrible than I was in high school. And there was a girl who legitimately told me she had a dream about the gospel of Zacchaeus. And I was Zacchaeus. And she like came back to me to apologize for how she had judged me for like 2 years because she was a junior. So she remembered like freshman, sophomore me, which was like very much in a transition period where I would have like streaks of like sincere, devout life and then just totally fall away for a weekend.
Yeah.
And people would see that and they'd be like, oh, this guy's a fraud.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I get that. Like, I understand that, you know, like I understand people having that feeling and that perspective, but she had this kind of like, wow, this guy's Zacchaeus, you know? And I always struggle with it myself of being like, and I'm sure you may have experienced this too, and I'd love to hear if you have, of like, how is God using me for this? You know? And I still can think about that sometimes today, and I get random messages from people of the past that will be rude and hateful and be like, you weren't like this, and you were this and that. And it's like, literally like somebody just like, to me, like personifying the devil. Because it's like, that is literally what Satan wants me to believe. You know what I mean? It's like, you were still who you were.
Yeah.
Right? It's the words of the devil versus God saying, you were new. Like, I made you a new creation.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I just think
you see that with Mary Magdalene in The Chosen, right? This invitation, people trying to keep thinking of her. She's like, no, I am changed now. Right? Like,
don't call me that. Yeah. She has the, her previous name. And she's like, that's not my name anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say almost all, I'm trying to think of any exceptions here, but like any of the saints that write about their prayer lives, you hear kind of repeatedly, Saint Teresa of Avila comes to mind, especially like, I am just absolutely the worst. Like there is no worse sinner.
Right.
And you're like, I don't know, like to comparatively
give us some hope, you know.
You're seeing, I think that's the lie. I was reflecting recently and included this in a talk, at Benedictine actually, that blessed are the poor in spirit is the first of the Beatitudes. And I think that's the grounding we need to come back to, because if we start to think like, oh, we're not that bad, right? Like the only other option is we're the worst. And I think we need to think of that in a healthy way of avoiding the slipping out of humility into the like, oh, wait, look at me. Like I'm no longer as bad as I was. Therefore, like maybe I got some wiggle room. But we can,
or pointing out the good that you do and acting like it offsets the bad,
right?
Which I did for a long time.
Yeah, like oh yeah, I'm net positive.
Yeah, exactly.
You win some, you lose some. Yeah. We're net positive here.
There's a lot of people who are net negative, or at least you can judge it to be that way, and so it's easy to feel good about yourself if you're like
100%. Yeah, but to be poor in spirit realizes that nothing you have, none of the goodness you have, is actually yours. Everything is a gift,
right?
And I think if we recognize that every grace we've been given, anything we achieve in a positive way is a gift, that changes our posture mentally from self-aggrandizement to gratitude. And I think when we actually live a life of gratitude, that is that contagious life of joy that is the ultimate tool for evangelization, right? You think about the early church as visualizing the chosen. I think that is the thing that is so stokes curiosity and then breeds the desire for imitation. Is like when someone can see in you that it's no longer about you, right? Like you're so fundamentally changed that it's you forget about yourself. That's such a foreign and freeing thing. I think that is what the show captures so great, and is what we constantly need to remind ourselves about.
Yeah, and that's what drives me crazy when because you have Catholics who many of whom I agree with on a lot of things, that end up like bashing the chosen and just being like, oh, it's fiction or whatever. And I'm like, and a lot of it is in a sense fiction, right? When they're like filling in the gaps in between, like that could accurately be described as fiction, I think. But I'm like, but it's beautiful fiction.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm like, just like Narnia is fiction, but it's beautiful fiction.
Yeah.
And to me, I get people wanting to be like, oh, we got to be careful with Jesus, and you don't want to misrepresent him in any like
for sure
substantial way. But like those moments with the apostles and the followers and the disciples of Jesus, where you get to see these little things like played out, and they capture it so well in like 7 minutes.
Yeah.
You know, what like many of us experience over years, over months or weeks or whatever it is, over a very long period of time. To me, like that's just artistic genius. Like that's unbelievable that people can do that
in a way that's like authentically feels like real life.
Yes.
It's not like a stylized, like high level beauty, but like a deeply authentic, emotional, real lifeness.
Without being cheesy and corny, like a lot of Christian things.
Which is hard. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So tell me, when we were in high school, we didn't talk about our spiritual lives at all. But how would I think you led like Kairos when I went on and things like that. Like, how would you describe where you were, I don't know, 10, 12, 14, 16 years old? Like, you talked about being Italian, Catholic, sometimes, maybe most of the time throughout your childhood in that order.
Yeah.
Like, was it anything other than just going to mass? Were you like a youth group kid? I don't remember any of that.
Yeah. So I, was involved around my parish. I was, I really wanted to be an altar server from the first year I could be, I think in 4th grade.
Why was that? Do you remember?
I think it was half a feeling of like, I want to be able to serve, like to participate in the mass. But I also think there was, and this will come out throughout, the various parts of my story, certainly some level of unhealthy pride of like being up there in front of people, kind of having a special role. So I think it was probably half healthy, half unhealthy reason. So I would, be involved in volunteering, kind of getting service hours through grade school. I was a head altar server in 8th grade, which meant that I had to
big dog
make sure that
come home.
I mean, it was honestly more work than anything else, but I had to make sure that there were 3 altar servers at every funeral in the parish for an entire calendar year, which usually meant I was there and I had to find 2 other people. So I went to darn near every single funeral that happened.
Oh, and you're in school, I guess, right?
Yeah. So if it was during
I was like, how are you doing that as an 8th grader? But you're there.
I run stuff.
Yeah, you run it. Yeah, you running shit out.
So
respect.
during the school day, that meant you get to get out of class, which I actually disliked because I always took class very seriously.
4.7, you know what I mean?
So whatever the max is, that's the goal.
That's it.
So that was a pain because I had to make everything up, but weekends and everything, and that was actually maybe my first real encounter with a reflection on life. And you see everything from infant funerals to kind of middle-aged, packed church weeping, loving large families, very small, kind of old elderly people where there's nobody there, and everything in between. And I don't know that I would have been able to articulate it at the time, but looking back, I think that was maybe my first, and what was otherwise a very kind of pristine and privileged upbringing of just happiness and love and family, a realization of we need to look beyond the comforts of this life, and we're all going to the same place. And so I think that was maybe my first encounter with that. That was in around the same time I was preparing for confirmation. So Father Kevin, now Bishop Kevin Rhodes, was a family friend and had just been ordained at the time. He was the youngest bishop in the U.S. So he was over for a house one night for dinner, and had asked me, do I know who am I thinking for confirmation saint names or anything? I hadn't thought about it at all. And he's like, well, why don't you go check out Thomas Aquinas, go get the Book of the Saints. And so we are slightly pre-digital natives, so we can kind of claim that as kind of the boomer part of our millennial.
That's right. Yeah, we said books and shit.
Yes. So we got the physical book next to the Encyclopedia Britannica.
I love it.
And pulled it out. And the first line was something to the effect of, growing up, Thomas Aquinas was known as the dumb ox because those around him were yet unaware of his intellectual genius. And I just looked up at my parents and I was like, well, this is me. This is obviously, people just don't get it. Right? So again,
not putting the respect on your name.
That's right. I didn't slap anybody at the time, but
respect.
So I think again for the wrong reasons entirely. At that point, I was like, this is my guy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So the ox part is because he also liked to eat, which I identified with. So the ox, he's big. And then the dumb part. So took Thomas Aquinas for the wrong reasons, but then started reading.
I don't think I knew that. I don't think I knew that he was physically large.
Yeah, you
just kind of always assumed the nerds are small, but I do picture for some reason St. Augustine to be larger.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I have no reason for thinking that.
I think most traditional depictions of Thomas, the angelic doctor, are of a very.
I have seen the plump classic
man.
Pints with Aquinas.
Yeah,
where he looks really ugly for some reason. I feel like he always gets dogged. Yeah. Maybe he was ugly. I don't know, but
I don't think of him that way.
That Pints with Aquinas one, he looks weird. Don't you think?
Yes, I think there's also a certain artistic style of that period that kind of that
wasn't generous.
They didn't necessarily able to capture the full kind of perspective.
I see. Okay.
My bad.
I don't mean to throw you off, but
that's okay.
But you had this intellect, so I can't throw you off.
Oh yeah, get behind me. The shenanigans. But scholars do, I think, debate. My understanding now is I think it's overblown artistically. We don't have any records showing he was enormously, large,
right?
And it wasn't
I feel like it was pretty hard to be obese back in those days.
Yeah, I mean, he did major intellectual work. He would dictate 8 simultaneous writings in Latin to scribes, and so he would if you think of Charles Magnuson or some of the other chess players who are playing 12 boards at the same time and make moves, call them out. He would dictate a sentence or two, and while the scribe is writing it down, he'd go to the next one, give a sentence, the next one, and pick back off. And that's how, in part, the Summa was written in some of his other work. So we're talking
8 things at a time.
That sticks out of my mind. Don't quote me on that. Don't cancel me if
3 things, 2 things at a time.
Anything at the same time, but yeah, it's certainly multiple, and it's certainly more than 3.
Even just doing one when you're dictating where somebody's writing, if you have to stop every 2 minutes, or 30 seconds, unreal.
It's pretty bananas.
Wow.
Yeah. Now to jump ahead, to consider that like the massive intellect, obviously doctor of the church, and then at the end of his life, having seen the beatific vision, stops writing towards the end of his life and says, based relative to what I've seen, all of this is straw. So that just, beatific vision is even beyond any of that. So I started reading about him. I started reading excerpts of the Summa, and from the first moments I read the kind of question response counter kind of structure and diving into kind of the proofs of the existence of God and learning about his life, I immediately gravitated towards like, this is truth, like capital T, like this is real. And from that moment, I never doubted the kind of intellectual truth that the faith describes reality. Mm-hmm. The problem over time was that I kind of kept the faith limited in kind of one box of truth next to kind of other boxes of truth like chemistry and physics, and did not allow it to really permeate my heart and soul to like create a life of discernment and surrender. So, but we'll come back to that. We'll put a bit on.
Yeah, so there's a lot to it, but yeah.
So that, kind of had that grounding, got confirmed, went to high school, got very involved, mostly in everything. I think like most of the clubs I was involved with.
Senior yearbook has a lot of your face.
It was,
which I think, what did we count? I texted you when Emily and I were going through the yearbook, and she was dying because I think there's like 6 pages where we're on together.
Something like that rings a bell. Yeah, there was some major work being put in.
Yeah,
but that included things like Quiz Bowl, which is like high school Jeopardy competitions, to soccer, to Pro Life Club, Christian Service Club, and so for me it was good outcomes, but again motivated maybe more by pride than by humility and wanting to kind of be in charge of and running and having an impact in a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And so junior year, Lancaster Catholic, which is one of the neighboring kind of area Catholic high schools, they had been running Kairos for a while. Some of myself and friends heard that they were doing Kairos, and I didn't really know what that was, but heard it was great. We went on their Kairos retreat. That was a really kind of spiritual awakening moment at that point. And then kind of we brought it back and led our first Kairos. And then you went on that retreat our senior year, and the 6 of us that had gone to Lancaster Catholic our junior year kind of brought it back, and now Kairoses are still going. That was the first time I remember having a really kind of penetrative contemplative prayer experience. And spoilers for people that haven't been on a Kairos retreat, but
if you want to go on Kairos, just go ahead and skip it forward about 90 seconds.
That's right. We'll keep it short.
But if you're past college, you're probably not going to get. I don't think they really do many adult, but I could be wrong. So if you're open to it someday, skip ahead. This is your warning. You've been sufficiently warned. Please go ahead.
One of the kind of culminating experiences is kind of praying with your peers, and so kind of the leaders are up front, and you go up and kind of offer prayer, and you're like physically like standing like hand on shoulder, or and I had one of our friends come up who was really going through something challenging, come up and like totally like let loose their intentions, and like ended up like crying in my arms, and like we were praying together. It was the first time I ever had an experience like that, and I think that was a glimpse that did not immediately like result in me praying every day, but looking back, and I haven't actually thought about this in a long time and have never talked about it, I think the power of just the surrender and the peace that comes from that. I remember coming back from Kairos. Kairos means God's time, right? As opposed to Chronos, which is earthly time. This time away from clocks and computers and everything. And just the calm-heartedness that I remember feeling after both retreats and in the days afterwards. I just felt so at peace, even though like all the other responsibilities I still had, and just like the purity of the relationships and the happiness and joy that's just like a part of life, kind of letting go of those things, was probably the last time I had that until 6 or 7 years later in the kind of reversion experience in and around Hallow. Yeah. But I think that was kind of, I lost that very specifically, and the losing of that into college allowed me to continue go down, get into to like really focus on just success and personal greatness and ego and pride and everything. I lost that surrender piece.
Interesting. Yeah. And so when you left I mean, do you feel like you left that? Because one thing we talk about a lot, obviously, with Hallow now is when we're working with schools and things like that, is people leave retreats like that so often and have no idea what the next step is, right?
Yeah.
Like you kind of had this deeper experience. And I think something that was very real for us, I described this, I think Northeast, a lot of America, a lot of the world is like this, where the church is just a certain type of way and it's not thriving. And that's how I often describe like Harrisburg Catholicism in so many ways. Is like when you go back, like it's hard to find like a truly beautiful mass, in my opinion. It's hard to find a lot of people who are like, I don't know, just like that seem like they're well formed in the faith. And I don't mean to be judgmental when I say that, but I remember going to meet people in other places and was like, wow, like Catholicism is different in different places, right? And when I think about when you're telling that story about people praying with each other, like I just feel like most of the people that were there, like generally we just didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah.
Right? Like we were like so poorly formed in a sense that it was like probably nobody that was leading the retreat. Maybe I can think of one person, who is now a religious sister, right?
Yeah.
Who was probably the only person that might have had like a conversion prior to that has like really stuck.
Yeah.
You know? Because you and I were still like very much pre-conversion. And I think most people, even, I don't know what percentage of the people that went on our Kairos our senior year are still practicing the faith, even the leaders, but most had not had like a deep conversion, right? Yeah. Or like been trained in, I think of like praying with people. Like I didn't know how to do that until I was like 23, right? Like even like 4 years into my conversion and you're like out here doing this stuff. And so did you feel like when you left that, do you think part of not sticking in a sense was that you just didn't know what to do next? Or like, what did you go after you had this kind of like pivotal experience? Like, what did you do from there?
Yeah.
You know?
First of all, shout out Sister Matilda.
Shout out to Sister Matilda.
I can think of a few
formerly
others.
known as Katie.
Yeah.
What a gem. And if you'd have told me, I think I could have guessed, if you would have told me like somebody here is going to become a sister, she was just like, I mean, she was the bomb.
I would agree with that after we broke up.
That's right.
Yeah. While we were dating.
It didn't feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't meant to be.
Yeah.
She was the Lord's.
She was looking for an upgrade and she certainly found one.
That's right.
I think there were a few of our friends, I can think of some former romantic interests of ours that are still Catholic. But yeah, I think the go forward like phrase that coming out of Kairos you say is live the fourth. So it's a 3-day retreat.
Right. Yep.
And like the fourth day is the rest of your life. And I remember being so hopeful and excited by that. I'm like, there is this in that message implicit, like you are changed now. Like this is supposed to be a change of who you are.
Right.
And I think this is part of the problem that you're talking about in the kind of church broadly is like a mantra is not a strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so like, okay, live the full, great. What does that mean? And while mountaintop experiences are really critical for many conversions and good and necessary and impactful, if you come back down the mountain and you think about the way of living that life is to be on the top of the mountain, that is impossible once you leave the mountain.
Yep.
Right. And so, we spend a lot of time thinking about this at Hallow and, on our team with working with schools and parishes. Like you need to realize that the change in your soul needs to be continued to renew. That seed needs to be watered and nurtured. And that takes intentional behavior and habit creation and, social reorientation, right? Lou Holtz has a famous kind of phrase he used to tell his players, like you show me your 5 closest friends and I will show you who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And if you kind of come back from a 3 days of no clocks, no phones, no TVs, and just talking about religion all the time or your life, and you go back exactly to your clubs and your sports and your school and your friend, like that will not stick. Right. I think the connection point there is we need to be realistic about what it means to live a life of conversion after your heart has been changed. Like it's not a once and done thing. Right?
Yeah.
We don't believe that just like I'm saved now, everything's Gucci.
Right.
Like you gotta live it out, and that takes strategy.
Yeah. What do you think is the solution to that? Because I think there's obviously a lot of goodness with things like Seek, Kairos, these like things that are designed to make these kind of mountaintop experiences. But there does seem, I think Seek has an advantage in a certain sense, right? Like if you come with your focused missionaries, you're going back to the same place with them, and like you ideally would enter into like discipleship.
Yep.
Do you think that just not enough like schools and other organization parishes have like the? Do you think are people just not thinking about it enough for like what happens after this? Do you think we just get like so caught up in the planning of it that we don't think about like what do we do from here?
Yeah.
Or do you think we make the assumption that people know deep down what to do from here because they've been Catholic for so long? Or where do you think the disconnect kind of exists in that? Because it's something that I talk about a lot when I think almost every time I speak at anything, I talk about how, especially something that's multiple days, because I think that's more likely to be like a true mountaintop experience. A one-day men's conference is kind of like, it can be inspiring, whatever, motivational. It's usually not life-changing. The overnight things, I think, do have like some magic to them, especially when you go away somewhere, right? Like an actual retreat. But I always explain that like you're going to have this mountaintop experience, and then the devil knows that, and he hates it, and he's going to like flood you with temptation. He's going to flood you with anything he can. And God also allows us to just go through lulls and what Screwtape Letters calls troughs, right? Like these kind of just periods of just like numbness. There's not really much there. Kind of like the honeymoon phase is ended. We know that that's coming. Why do you think people don't better prepare retreatants and the people that come to them? Why do they not prepare them better for that?
Yeah, I think it's a confluence of a couple of things, and I think it's almost all 100% unintentional. I think the skill set of creating a retreat is massively different than coaching someone on how to live a daily life that is different than before.
Mm-hmm.
So like the people creating it, that's not their bread and butter. Right? Like the bread and butter is the retreat experience. Creating that, it's a distinctly different skill set.
Right.
You also have the natural human temptation to think about like what is the end of this thing? And the end of this thing is to create the mountaintop and be like, okay, mission accomplished. Right. So I think there's a natural piece of like, I did my job. Right.
Yeah.
So that's a natural piece.
Which isn't necessarily wrong.
Right.
You
hear me use this phrase all the time. It's necessary, but insufficient.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you do need that, right? You need to have the conversion of heart, but it's not a one-step process.
Mm-hmm.
Like step 1 is done and good, but there is a step 2 and step 3 and step 4, and I think we just don't think about it that way. And it probably in part, maybe the third reason is step 2 is a lot harder than step 1 in many ways. It requires real work and ongoing relationship, right? Like even from the concept of like the physical space, the budgeting, the calendaring, right? Like it's easy to like say, okay, this is like the beginning and the end of the weekend. You're going to have the logistics to go into that. Mm-hmm. Okay. Like I can be responsible for 60 high school kids for this period of time, but like then they go home and like I don't have authority in that place, and you know I got to live their own lives and they have responsibilities. Then I have my own family, whatever. Like that's just a much harder strategy to create. And
and that can get overwhelming, right? Like it can be kind of discouraging in a sense, because you think about it, it reminds me very much of like 1 Corinthians 12, which leads into 1 Corinthians 13 of talking about love. But in 12, he talks about how St. Paul's writing about how we're all the body. And he basically says like the hand can't say to the foot, but the foot to the eye, I don't need you. And we all are different parts of the body. And I think what it does show to me is that, again, somebody who's leading retreats that says, oh, I did my job, like they might not be wrong in that, but there's somebody back at the parish in that person's family that is not doing their job.
Yeah.
Which is really sad. Father Mike talks about that. I remember there's this, I think I've sent it to you. Maybe, I can't remember. But it's called I was going to say The Hour That Changed Your Life, but that's the one on the Eucharist. Yeah. Telling the story of God's love. One of my favorite things. I've listened to it like 10 times. It's an in-person talk that he gave at the seminary, St. Charles in Philly. And he was talking to seminarians, priests, and lay people that came. And they put it out as a podcast for Ascension, and the YouTube video has like the Q&A afterwards. And I think it was in the Q&A that he says, I have all these people who write to me or ask me or say like, oh, I watched your videos and I was so, amazed by it and I want to become Catholic now. And he talks about how he has this moment. And I think he's very genuine, and I've met him, and I have no reason to think that he's, prideful in saying this. And I don't say this for me, but just for like disclaimer for anybody else that might think this is like a prideful thing. But his thing was like, I often wonder and hope that when they show up to wherever they're going, they'll meet somebody who cares, you know, because he says he encourages them. He's like, Google your local parish, you know, and he knows that there's this wide spectrum of what they're going to find when they get there, you know. And I just think about how hard that is, and just how sad it is that, like, if the church was running on all cylinders, like, we'd convert the whole world, you know, even if just everybody that we have that comes to mass right now, if we all just really bought in and prayed about and thought about, what is my role and how can I develop my interior life so that I can actually accomplish that role well, we would change the entire world. I don't even think we need to, like, recruit any new people besides what we currently have, even at the low numbers of activation we currently are operating at. And I just think it's so sad to think about that. I think a lot of times we wrongfully blame those people, right, that are leading the retreats or that don't feel like they give people the next step. And there's something to that can be bad in, like, the non-denominational sense, where they are just, like, certain places that just, like, baptize people just to baptize them because they're like, oh, now you're saved, and they count that in their numbers, and they're like, we saved 1 million people this year, and it's like, what does that even mean, right? Like, it's just kind of nonsense and bad theology. But, like, people who don't think that, and they're just trying to give people this encounter with Christ, it's like they have to have, because, like you said, you have 60 high school kids, you can't meet with them every day. Can't meet with 60 high school kids every month if you have a job and a family. You know, like, there has to be other people.
Yeah, I mean, actually, we were getting set up for this. I picked up the old 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and, you know, one of them is start with the end in mind.
Yep.
And I
Habit
think
5.
Yeah, if so, like,
oh no, Habit 2. Forgive me. That's one of the individual ones.
I don't remember. Yeah, it's one of the
Habit 5 is seek first to understand, then to be understood.
There you go. I'll take your word on that.
I'm embarrassed.
I don't remember.
Yeah.
But for sure, one of them is
That's right.
Start with the end in mind.
Factual.
And if we think about, like, I think it's hard to, like, what unit of planning can you effectively plan on?
Yeah.
It's like, if you are a high school or you are a campus minister in a high school, you tend to want to plan on an end that you can achieve under your own control, because you want to,
for sure,
set a goal that's achievable to you. And that's why I think it takes a tribe, it takes a church, it takes one body. Because, like, if the end is having a graduating senior who is on the way to sainthood, no individual person can do that alone.
Mm-hmm.
It, like, takes a community that does involve the family, but even outside of the family, takes multiple people outside of the campus minister. And so I think,
or the chaplain or whoever, theology teacher,
whoever the person, great. You know, we had a great theology teacher that was very involved in our lives.
Yep,
multiple. And it is a hard task, but an important task. I do think maybe starting, like, if I was thinking about, you know, tips for the church or for schools, like, let's get bought in around what the end that we're pursuing is. And if we have that language, if we have that mission, you know, that's could be hard to do if you've never talked about it before and you have people there for very different reasons. I just came from before this, from, like, a founder summit of other founders, and we were talking a lot about hiring. And I was sitting next to a person who said, every problem is a people problem. There is no process that wasn't created by someone and approved by someone else and implemented by one of those or other people.
Yeah.
And if something failed, it was because either the person that created it, the person that approved it, or the person that did it didn't work. And that ultimately is a people problem. And all people problems start when they come in the door on who you're hiring. It then continues into how you incentivize and keep those people, and what happens if they're not the right people, and kind of being accountable to that and showing them out and helping them find something else if they're not a right fit. But we need to agree on what the goal is we're pursuing. And I think we need to be realistic that it takes a team, and that to create a championship team, you need championship players that are all bought into the system and are willing to play in it and working towards a team end. So I would, you know, more than think about what are we doing wrong tactically and how do we think about that first Monday after the Sunday of Kairos, like, let's take a way huge couple steps back and say, like, okay, can we all agree that what we want is graduating seniors who are on the way to sainthood?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone around the table needs to believe that.
Right.
How do we set that as a goal? And then we can talk about all the tactics, but strategy before tactics.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah, I love all that. I think that's really every problem is a people problem is really interesting. I think that'd be quite the challenge to get a lot of church leaders to believe that, you know, who don't like to make a lot of personnel changes. But Anyways, let's dive back in. So you leave this mountaintop kind of experience, and now you're headed off to Notre Dame, Our Lady's University, and you have the opportunity there. So did you like? You obviously, from my understanding, like didn't stop going to mass, but like, what was your thoughts around? Like, did you have any desire upon arrival at campus to be like, I'm gonna like grow in my faith? You had this experience before. Like, did you have any desire to like sign up for Bible studies? Was Focus there? Anything like that? Like, what was that kind of like your freshman year?
Yes, we don't have Focus at Notre Dame. Notre Dame, for those who don't know, is run by the Order of the Holy Cross. So we have Holy Cross priests. We had a rector living in our dorms, so single-sex dorms, men, women. I think it was at the time 28 or 30 dorms. Chapel in every dorm. Entrance to the dorm. On the right is the chapel. It was the Chapel of Our Lady of Guadalupe. On the left was Father Pete's room where he lived in residence, and then kind of 4 floors of a couple hundred dudes. And one of the most beautiful parts about the spirituality of Notre Dame is there is a real cultural commitment to the Mass. And you'll have a lot of non-Catholics that will be going to sometimes multiple days a week during
Mass. To Mass.
10 p.m.
No kidding.
In the dorms. And
I don't think I knew that.
Yeah. So certainly on Sundays, the dorm masses tend to be packed, standing room only, people coming down in their pajamas, whatever, friends coming over, dating people. And that was really beautiful. I think there is, the risk of that is over culturalizing that as opposed to understanding the sacramental theology of it. But my experience, Father Pete in my dorm, was excellent and amazing. And one of the pillars, I think, that kept me going in my faith life. I would lector, extraordinary minister in dorm mass, and I wasn't really involved in campus ministry. Mm-hmm. While on campus, I gravitated towards kind of all the business clubs and other things going on, but did always stay grounded in dorm mass, and sometimes multiple times a week. And that was my first experience with kind of daily mass outside of maybe in grade school. I was like altar server some morning before mass is like an assignment or something. So that was beautiful. But I really, as I started to kind of, in high school, you're let's say like, you don't know how big of a fish you are in like a small pond.
Yeah.
And so part of college for me was figuring out like, you're in a huge pond, like how big of a fish are you?
Yeah. So I see. Interesting.
I really wanted to, again, for the wrong reasons, I really wanted to try and see like, can I be the biggest fish in this pond from an academic excellence perspective? And I was willing to like outwork whoever I needed to demonstrate.
One thing I know about you is you're willing to work.
So certainly to an unhealthy level, took all those credits. I probably averaged, 5.5 hours of sleep for like most of my academic experience.
Yeah.
Studying a lot, doing a lot. And
that sounds right.
Being involved in a lot, which prepared me decently well for my first couple of professional experiences. But I just really wanted to, and looking back on things, I think this was a desire for power as a way to try and control everything in my life as opposed to letting go. And so that was being the best so that I could be a leader of organization, so that I could set the goals, the controls and everything. So like I could have my hand on the wheel and the pedal. And, that led to a lot of academic success, a lot of prestige in my peers, but really minimizing the, like, what should I be doing versus what do I want to do? It was all about a want, desire, me, and really feeding ego more than anything else. So along that way, I kind of really gravitated towards so I was intellectually interested in investing in finance, and it happened to be that kind of the thing in that category that had the really respect of my peers, and like the thing to do if you were really smart and really hardworking was going to work on Wall Street. I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. Like, you make a lot of money, everybody respects you, you're like the guy that was able to do that. Mm-hmm. And so I worked really hard to be able to do that, and was ultimately successful in that. I do think there are some lessons in there that were healthy lessons. A lot of the lessons were unhealthy lessons, but maybe one of the healthier ones is, the famous expression, I don't know if it's attributed to anyone directly, but like, luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
Yep.
And so I worked really hard, not only on the academic side, but also the relationship side and networking. And so kind of my first big professional break there was a school project, basically. It's a semester-long case study sponsored by an employer. And the person on the employer side was kind of mid-level vice president at the time at Goldman Sachs, which is like my dream job at the time. So I worked really hard the entire semester, really tried to make myself known as the person that was going to like do really good, dependable work. Got to travel at the end of the semester to New York, present, really built a strong relationship, stayed in touch, worked really hard. And then that next year, kind of the junior summer internship for these kinds of jobs is like the make or break thing. They hire all of their full-time people from the internship.
Right.
And like the recruiting for that is a very structured thing that everyone prepares for. And, it's like super intense period. 3 months before that hiring process happened, there was this random accelerated diversity hiring day. It's like, name your person category that gets put in that bucket. They get to go and hire ahead of time.
They get to go in advance.
There's a certain number of seats. Yeah.
Oh man.
So this is pre-affirmative action, all the kind of.
Well, not pre-affirmative action.
The litigation, the recent litigation.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say because I got college on affirmative action, brother. Come on now.
Congratulations.
Where we are today, thanks to affirmative action, even though I'm against it because I don't think that I should have benefited unfairly because of my skin color.
I'm glad the word or the Lord draws straight with our crooked paths.
That's right. So, praise God. Praise God, baby.
Just for clarity, that was Nathan, and I'm not one of these Brian Kelly shows up in the South and you start, develop an accent all of a sudden.
That's right. Yeah. Your favorite football coach?
There you go. Well, he was at this time in college, but
you really loved him.
So it was 3 months early, and this spot opens up. And, there's these like campus recruiting teams. So like the Notre Dame team like grabbed a spot and they were like, who do we know that might be ready 3 months early? And this guy called me on the phone. He said, hey, can you fly to New York tomorrow? Like, this is going to be your one shot. Like, if you're not ready, say no, but like, are you ready? I said, I'll be there. Flew the next day, did well in the interview, got the internship offer, which turned into a full-time offer. And that's where I started my career in New York on Wall Street. So one of those like, there is some benefit to like being ready ahead of time and working hard. Like that is in part how you can succeed.
That's really interesting. Now tell me about, so you talked about earlier, and we don't necessarily have to go like super deep into this now either, but you talked about how you had, I think it's really interesting to have this intellectual conversion. I always call it kind of intellectual conversion, heart conversion, right? And you had to kind of, you're convinced of the truth of the Catholic faith, right? Like this is truth. You mentioned that. But you also recognize that like it didn't necessarily impact the way you were living your life. It didn't impact your activities. And for me, I know I saw it, and you can go into as much of this or as little as this as you want to. But you in high school, I think that like I remember you being more of like somebody who you were Catholic, but I kind of just see it as now what I think of like a culturally Catholic person, right? Like it was important to you. You would have said it was important to you. You would never miss mass. There were certain things that you would never do, right? Like I think we all kind of had like our selected, kind of like a unknowing cafeteria Catholicism, right? Whereas like certain things you would never do. But you were more like on the straight and narrow, and you were obviously very academically inclined. And then I know that in college, like you started to lose your way a little bit as far as like getting more into partying or different things like that, kind of tailed the end of high school.
Yeah.
But for you, like,
doing parts of your leadership.
Doing parts of my leadership. Yeah, thank you very much. I was very influential at the time. And that has continued on since then. I used to always tell people, man, I'm like, and I feel like people don't get this enough. And you're one of the few people that like really understands this because of that, because of exactly what you just said. Is that like, I'm like, people didn't understand that both the devil and the Lord really wanted me. Because I was really good at leading people to whichever one I was currently playing for.
Yeah. For sure.
And I recognize that, and I appreciate that that's who God made me to be, right? Is to be an influential person. But I think that I experienced a large amount of spiritual warfare because of that, right? Because the devil knows, like, if we lose him, we're going to lose more people. If we win him, we're going to win more people, And so there's kind of like that aspect of that. But for you in your life, at this point, you're not really living a Catholic lifestyle. but you are still going to mass and things like that. Like, how do you reflect on that time and why you felt like you had that kind of cognitive dissonance where you were able to do both of those things? I've talked extensively about my time of doing that and just kind of like living, saying I believe something, but my actions didn't show it. Like, how do you kind of reflect on that time of college and even post college or whatever for you when you were kind of getting into that?
Yeah, there was one really specific moment where I think the Lord was trying to grab me back senior year that I'll talk about in a second, that I ignored. And looking back was very clearly, I think, that thing. I think the rationalization, if I had to explain like why I was able to compartmentalize that, was I've always been good at compartmentalization. And I think that's in part how I was able to operate.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Academically and professionally in areas of kind of high stress. I was like able to box those things out and focus on what needed done and kind of not allow myself to be overwhelmed by how much stuff was going on. So that like my highest GPA semesters, not that there were any like very low ones, but like on a relative basis, were always where I had the most to do. And so like I gravitated towards having everything and just like line it up, knock it down, light it up, knock it down. And I think that created kind of this internal lesson of if you work hard enough and have enough stuff, you can kind of control the world. And then it's ultimately like yours to control. And you can like tune out the things when it's not the time to focus on them and focus on the things you need to at the time.
Right.
And I think that kind of built up the walls in my mind and heart that kind of boxed in faith as like, I got into a lot of debates all throughout college on theology and people that had fallen away. And I would
argue for the faith, right?
Oh yeah. Like, in a very judgmental and like putting the person down, like intellectually batter them into submission. Obviously very bad. So I think in that way it was another intellectual.
It's such a crazy thing too, you know,
which is so antithetical to what the gospel is.
I find myself whenever, and I often have to confess being judgmental in confession, just like saying that when listing the other things that I've done, it just always feels so stupid. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I'll be like, yeah, like I did this, I did that, and I've been thinking this, or I, yelled at my wife or whatever, you name it. And then I'm like, and I've been judging other people, and I'm just like, that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah. One of my best confessions was that, I said something along those lines.
Yeah.
In that, like, let's say a softer, more, thing versus what may feel like a more specific and worse thing.
Sure.
He interjected and was like, well, like, what are we talking about exactly? How frequently? Like, what are you saying? And like pushed me on like what exactly and
you were doing.
Yeah. And I think that was exposing to me at the time. And realizing like, oh, we just write off like, okay, this is a set of things I've done, but like, let's really bring and be aware of how frequently and in what way have we sinned.
Yeah.
So, like, to be really sorry for it, you got to like grasp the fullness of it
to lay it all out.
I think we can kind of like slip that in there.
Oh, brother, I talk about that all the time. I actually mentioned that on a podcast I recorded just recently, where I was talking about a conversation I had with somebody, and she was talking about how it's really important with like future generations or young people to share with them how much God loves us and that God isn't necessarily like counting all the things we do wrong or whatever. And I was like, well, he kind of is, like I'm like in confession, they tell you it's better to be specific and to list how many times you've done the sin, right? Like it's better to say you lied 12 times and like have the awareness of how many times you've lied or fornicated or whatever it is, watch pornography or judge other people. Like some of the things are just like too hard to track, but some of those bigger ones, especially you receive communion in a state of mortal sin, whatever, right? Like those are good things to list the numbers. I'm like, that's what any good confessor's ever told me.
Yeah.
So I'm like, if that's good to do in confession, that must mean God wants us to do it. If God wants us to do it, that must mean he probably has an idea of how many times I've done it, right? If he wants me to confess how many times I've done it, if it's wrong for me to just say it, that I did it once and I did it 10 times.
Yeah. I think
God must be tracking that difference.
Yes, I don't think he's a scorekeeper. Because you can't hustle him. Yeah, you can't hustle him. I don't think he's a scorekeeper in that, like, you don't want to lead that to believe, again, back to like the I'm net positive, like as long as I haven't
100% no.
So like that would be the wrong interpretation of that.
But I think this idea, I think what some people don't recognize is that the more you sin, it is true that the further away you're getting from God.
Yeah. I mean, like, and
it doesn't necessarily mean that like counting score. It doesn't mean like God's counting it up and just thinking, oh, you're so bad. But it does mean that if you're living a life of mortal sin and continuing in that, like you're on a trajectory towards hell. And at some point we have to tell people that.
Yeah.
You know? And that is inherently scary.
For sure. For sure.
And at least it ought to be.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, people do spend more versus less time in purgatory. And that's maybe another way to think about it.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
You have more to kind of purify yourself. Our mutual friend, Brian, has done a deep dive on purgatory recently.
The love of my life.
And
like he's just studying about it, or what do you mean?
I think he came up in his own prayer and he was like diving. He's like, I haven't really thought a lot about purgatory, and like it came up in the sense of like plenary indulgence. Like, what is this?
Okay, yeah.
And apparently there is a bit written in the words in the lives of the saints, talking about kind of the visions they've had and like the intense pain in purgatory to really like
it is not lit.
Yeah, so it's walking out of confession gonna get
it is not
you're out of hell, but there it's an active, and I think I've spent a couple semesters studying Dante, and I think one of the beautiful parts of that is like it is a mountain you have to climb, and different parts of that climb can be much more intensive. And what you do
some mountains with some heavy packs on my
shout out Mountain Face.
Yeah, it is hard.
Yeah. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, thank you. But anyway, so going back to your
so college. So I think
you had this moment of God trying to pull you back. You said,
yeah. So senior year, and at this point, I've like become the man who I thought I wanted to be. I outworked everyone. I got the job everyone wanted. I'm running multiple clubs that I had made me who I was. And we had an exchange. So one of these clubs was Student International Business Council. We have kind of an exchange program with Peking University in China, and they send over a group in the spring, and then we send over a group in the fall. And it's like
spies,
business student. Well, I'm not going to comment on that. So we're going to come back, and
we had this kid at Benedictine that was like an exchange student, and he like randomly disappeared one day. He would like leave his phone in another room if he was like talking about something from China. He'd be like, I can't have my phone. He'd just be like, okay. He'd be like, yo, chill. They'd be like, go put his phone in a different room and then come back.
That is an interesting.
It was crazy. And then he just like disappeared one day.
I will pray for him.
Yeah, please do. He was goofy. Loved me though. Huge fan.
That checks out.
Just called me Beast.
Wow.
Hi, Beast. Yeah, shout out to Peter.
I appreciate that.
Hi, Beast.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, he was a character. Anyways.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Shout out to China. Shout out to the spies.
We pray for everybody.
Shout out to President Xi, who's in America right now.
We pray for everybody. So we have this exchange group of students come over spring break, and we're taking them on a tour of campus, and most of them had never been to America before.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is South Bend, Indiana. We have one of the nice things on campus is like the new ice arena we have, Compton Ice Arena. And so we go there where the hockey team plays, and we took them ice skating. People go out, first person like runs out, just slams down, breaks their arm.
Concussion.
Breaks their arm.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have to go to the medical thing. So that was not great. So we're like, okay, no more ice skating. So we're going around. We eventually get to the Basilica on Notre Dame's campus, which you've been to. It's beautiful. It's great. And we're walking in, and they're like, what is this place?
I remember this story now.
They have like no context of Christianity at all. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, you're like, that's Jesus. They're like, Jesus who?
Yeah. Jesus?
Yeah. He's from like, Jesus the Christ.
There you go. Yeah, so I'm like, okay, game on. Like, we could put on.
I'm Mother Loving Thomas Aquinas reincarnated.
We're going out here. We're going to do the thing.
So, mox this bitch up.
No, we there's also some, they're pretty proficient in English, but we're going to, we're trying to stay away from technical terms and have like basic language.
Sure, yeah.
For communication. So I'm like, okay, Catechism 101. All right, let's start. That guy hanging from the cross over there, that's Jesus. That's God. God created the world.
Not that specifically, but that's a representation.
Representation of the human.
They're just like worshiping.
Yeah.
Well, you're close.
Yeah. You may
kneel, but don't go too crazy.
See him elsewhere.
Kneel, don't bow.
Yeah. And so he was God. God created the world.
That was touchdown Jesus.
Yep. That was a great representation.
Thank you.
His mom is in gold in the building next door on the top of the dome.
Facts.
So we're like, he came, we were created good. We fail. We do bad things. So they're called sin. And, if we sin and we just do bad things, we go to hell. And that's forever after we die. And that's the bad place. We don't want to go to the bad place. We want to go to heaven. And if you look up, that's what it looks like. You got all the saints up there. And so we're kind of walking around looking. The
Basilica is beautiful. It's a great place to preach.
Great example. That was why they were so beautiful, right? They're for the illiterate population, right? This was theology, right? Looking around. So you're like, all right, who are all these other people? These are the saints. These are people that did it right. Right? They didn't, when they sinned, they were sorry. They apologized and they went to heaven. Right. And that's why we want to be like them. We look up to them. We learn from their lives. And we're walking around like, oh, what's that big kind of like book up there? Okay, that's scripture. That's where we read from the readings. That's the word of God. He told us, and that is his word, and we learn from that. So we're going around. At the end, they're like, wow, that was like crazy. And so we're talking about that. I was like, any questions? And I feel at this point like I've dodged every bullet I possibly could. I feel like I generally communicated the fact that God exists. He came as a person to save us. He died.
You done preached the gospel.
He rose from the dead, and we need to love him. And I was like, any questions? Fully expecting there to be none. I'm like, let's get the heck out of here.
You're thorough.
Yeah. Less that I was thorough and more like I want to get out of this situation, right? Because at some point my, evangelizing in this context is going to run amok. And so I'm like, I need to get out of here.
Right.
And they're like, yeah, one question. I'm like, what are these boxes in here for? I'm like, what boxes? Like the wooden ones. And I was like, what wooden box? And they're like, point. And it was confessionals. I was like, oh, great question. So, you see these guys running around, they're all black, white collar. Yeah. Okay. Those are the priests. So Jesus, he's up there, right? He came, he's going to come back again. He died, rose for it. But he's not here right now physically. So we have these priests. Christ created the church. It gets passed on person to person, laying on hands. And he acts like Christ in our lives. And what you can do is you can go to these places when you do the bad things, you do the sin, because we all sin, right? Mm-hmm. But if we do that and don't do anything else, and we go to hell, and that's not where we want to go. If you're really sorry, you can go in, you tell the priest, who's the person of like Jesus up on the cross there, and in his name, he will forgive you. And then you come out and you get to go to heaven again. And legitimately, like their jaws like hit the floor. They're like totally stunned. And they said, wow, how much does that cost? Like monetarily. Mm-hmm. I was like, dang. That is such an obvious, like when you explain it in that way, it's like super basics. Like how amazing is it that we have confession and that Christ loves us enough to forgive us for all of the things we've done, to distance ourselves from him, to hurt him. And that obviously has an immense value. And in their like whatever culture, things that are valuable have a price, right?
Right. Yeah. Nothing's free.
Exactly. But he died and freely gives us that forgiveness and his love. I think looking back on that, it was like a come back to me in confession moment.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I allowed that to kind of slip by.
Yeah. Interesting. So it's kind of a powerful thing that didn't really make a difference.
I miss it at the time. I remember it now, and I talk about it frequently in talks.
Yeah. It's a beautiful story.
To try and invite people to confession.
Yeah.
A couple priests have asked if they can use that in homilies, and I said yes.
Please.
I want a licensing fee. So yeah,
that's right. How much does that cost?
Exactly. Yeah.
How much does it cost?
Confession, free licensing.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service, Father. That's amazing. So then you go, and now you're top dog. You're doing all these things. You're just crushing it in life, and you go off and you go into your professional career. Now, for me, I know when I left college and I was going into my professional career in the Army, I was like, I knew I was going into the lion's den. And you very much, going into finance, Wall Street, were very much also going to the lion's den. Did you have an awareness of that? Like, did you know, because you'd done the like internships and things like that, like, did you have an idea that you were going into this place that was going to be, just very countercultural, or at least in great opposition to your faith and like any type of morality? Or were you somewhat naive going into it, do you think?
Yeah, so I would not have at the time kind of identified as like I'm going in there as like a warrior for Christ. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it didn't feel like opposition. I knew that I was going to have to work hard. And that was probably the most thing in my mind. Like I had to gear up for like going into battle, less in a spiritual sense and more like in a physical, literal sense. I loved my experience in New York on Wall Street. Like I loved the people I worked with. Not a ton of
loved working all the time.
You know, it was interesting. So my now wife and I were doing long distance for 2 years. She was in Indianapolis.
Shout out to Sam.
Shout out to Sam.
I really love Sam.
She's great.
We love you, Sam.
Yeah. Exciting to co-produce children with you. So in that sense, it was like I'm in a relationship. We got to see each other basically once a month. Every other month we go to different places. And the that way I could just work all the time. Like I wasn't going out dating. I wasn't like, if we were, you okay? You gonna survive this?
I think the wildest line ever.
Hey, love, go forth.
Oh man, you're watching too much Theo.
Go forth and multiply.
That is crazy.
Take that. Love generates.
Oh man, it does. Two become one.
That's right. And then three. So
and then three.
Yeah.
Well, we recently heard it taught in a marriage retreat that like the two becoming one. What that often means is like Gio is one person. You know, Jordan is one person. Like that is the two becoming one. Is the third person, similar to the Trinity, right? Like the two becoming.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Gio's my son, by the way. So,
Giovanni.
Yeah.
Forgive me,
please. Thank you.
Yes, sorry. Anyways, back to you.
So in that sense, I was like, you know, on the off chance, like I was living with two friends from Notre Dame. We're all three working in the same place. You're in this cohort of analysts. We're all like in the office together, like all the time. Like that was my social experience. We'd go out when we had time and do whatever, but like the work was really stimulating. We got a ton of responsibility relative to our age, made a lot of money, got to live in New York. And like I respected almost all of the people I worked for and had a great time. They'd actually just recently instituted a Saturday policy. So
interesting.
From 8 p.m. on Friday night to 8 a.m. Sunday morning, you couldn't work unless like the head of the group signed off, and that was relatively rare.
That's now in place, or that was in place then?
It was implemented for the first year when I joined, so I benefited from this.
Okay.
So whereas before it was just like 7 days a week without end.
It's interesting that Saturday was the chosen day off.
Yes.
Is that a Jewish thing, or is there like a...
I think Friday night is a more natural end to kind of the financial work week.
I see.
And then kind of Sunday you get ahead on Monday. But yeah.
Interesting.
Certainly not a massive focus on the Christian Sabbath. But,
evidently.
It was
a lot of vigil masses, I guess.
Yep. Hey, sundown.
That's right.
So I mean, interestingly, I lived a like 5-minute walk, and in between my 5-minute walk and my office was a mission chapel, Catholic mission chapel, where I would go to mass.
Oh, really?
And it was the chapel right across the street from where the World Trade Centers came down. So they had some amazing relics from that time. They like housed a lot of kind of people in that. There's a great history in that place in Battery Park City in southern Manhattan, which is cool. But anyway, so I really love that experience. So I'm still going to mass on holy days and Sundays, and I was a little bit too cavalier, I think, as a junior analyst, like on holy days, like on random Tuesday, I walk around and like noon, like, hey, noon mass, like
really
trying to get,
wow, recruiting the folk,
which, you know, I would put a little group together, and certainly people knew that I was Catholic, but I wasn't really taking the conversation much further, if anybody ever.
And there's weight to that, right? Like there's almost something that is interesting about, I usually get frustrated with this about people who would be like adamantly Catholic somewhere, like in an argument with someone over one topic, and then just be like totally ratchet the next minute. And so I started like realizing my frustration with that was like, wait, I got to take this seriously then. If I'm like, I had people tell me this often happened. Some of the most memorable times were playing basketball, like post conversion when I started leading Bible study and speaking and stuff, that like I'd be like cussing people out playing basketball like I normally would. And for missing layups or dropping passes or whatever it was. And somebody telling me like, dude, you can't be doing that anymore. Like we really look like these guys look up to you. Yeah. You know, like you can't, that time's gone. And I just remember being like, damn, you're right. So there's something all that to say that there's weight to when people know that you're Catholic, it's a beautiful thing. Sometimes it's like a hump to get over, but then you also recognize that there's like responsibility that comes with it,
Yeah.
Which I'm sure neither of us fully got at the time when we were 22.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't claim perfection there. Our colleague Jacob, shout out Jacob, reminded me recently that I can't remember where in the New Testament it comes, but those that are converted, their hearts become innocent like lambs. And a reversion to the state of innocence is a reflection of living in grace. And that does mean letting go of certain things. I was talking, shout out again, Brian, who's like, yeah, I don't listen to rap anymore. Right? Like I've had to, let that go.
Nor reggae?
I can't speak for him on that. It's his own unique art form. But there are
they got the same beat in every song.
There are things you have to let go of if you're fully living a life of conversion.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was doing that.
Good for Brian, by the way.
Yeah.
Good for you. Be easy.
There is maybe one day he'll be here.
Oh my gosh, that would be a trip.
That would be something.
I would love that.
Be something.
I need to just bring the mics to the next quarterly, and I'm just going to run through everybody.
There you go. There you go. Hopefully he's in the country.
That's very unbelievable.
So I was in New York doing that. I knew that I wanted to ultimately, like, my dream job was to be an investor. And at the time, I was basically an advisor in investment banking. It was like you're advising companies on doing stuff. And
was that crazy at like 23?
There were some pretty wild experiences.
Because it sounds like the guy I met at Best Buy the other day.
You should have actually told that story on the podcast. But, I would say the crazier thing was the next job. The first one, like as an analyst, there were a few moments where I was given some like real external responsibility that was like mind blowing. And I think that there was some. So usually as the analyst, you work on Microsoft Excel, PowerPoint, you're putting together presentations, whatever. Then the part
you've worked with Excel before.
Once or twice.
No,
once or twice. It is my real passion.
Truly, few things make you happier.
That is right. But it's like usually you're in the office and then like the partner and the VP goes out to have the meeting with the company or whatever.
Okay.
There were a few instances towards the end of my kind of tenure where I'd, again, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I really like worked really hard, knew the thing in and out, and like some of the partners, one partner in particular that I worked for, like really kind of grew to respect my work product. He's like, hey, "You're coming to this meeting," so I flew down to actually near Birmingham, Alabama. We're like out in the middle of nowhere. This company we're going to serve, and it was two partners and me. And
wow, how many partners are there?
Not a lot.
Okay,
yeah, so.
Like more or less than 5?
Fewer in my group. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to get. I was like, I don't know if there's like 15 or like 2.
No. Yeah. So each group kind of has its partners that runs individual or industry groups. And so I think 4-ish at the time in that group.
Got it.
So 2 of them and I are going down and, as an analyst, you like sit there silently and like just being there is your educational experience, whatever. And the one partner was meeting us there. So I was with the guy that like had grown to respect me. And so we're sitting there, he's like flipping through the, printed slide deck and he's like, all right, so like, which section are you doing? I was like, what? We're like 20 minutes away from this meeting. He's like, which section are you like leading us through? And I was like, I can do any of them if you want.
It's a little flex.
Yeah. Well, he's like, because, anyway, so he was like, all right, why don't you take the acquisition opportunities? I was like, all right. And so we go up and we meet the other partner. Like, we're about to walk in. He's like, all right, Alessandro's doing the second section. And the other partner looks at me. He's like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. We got to walk in. And it was like CEO, CFO, COO, whatever, 3 of us. And like, okay, and we have some ideas we'd like to present to you, kind of acquisition opportunities, kind of get your take on them. And just like, all right, Alessandro's going to walk us through that. And I'm like
23.
Yeah. So that was pretty interesting.
Wow. I always, something that's interesting to me in our lives is I often describe you, this is another thing with our friendship. I think I've told you this before, but I describe you as my most similar friend, which is funny because we have some pretty substantial differences, but I think that there's no friend in my life that our interests aligned. They align so well, and like all the things we like to do. Like, I feel like we like golf about the same amount. I think we like sports around the same amount, stand-up comedy, right, etc. Yep. Music, whatever. I probably like country a lot more than you do.
Fact.
But generally speaking, like there's a lot of alignment there. But I think what's also interesting is we've also had just like, while having very different experiences, such similar experiences. You know, like my experiences of going and like being in front of generals, or like being deployed when I turned 24 in Afghanistan as a platoon leader, you know, and just having these moments of like, how do I have this opportunity and responsibility at this young age? I mean, we were both working like all the time, right? Yeah. Fresh out of college and stuff like that. So it's just funny to me, both going to Catholic universities, that mine soon was not going to be on Newman Guide. Yours wasn't on Newman Guide at that time, but like had not been super strong in their Catholic identity and stuff like that. So it's just funny to me always how like we had these like lined up things, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
In phases of life. Even getting out, like even around when I left the Army, it was around when you left and started working for the church. I left and started working for the church. Yeah. You know? It's just funny how it all lined up so well.
And some steps up, right? So we each had that initial kind of coming out of school, and then like you took it up at Ranger School, I took it up with the next job. And it's like you're, you know, kind of leaning in, and it was in the leaning in that had the experiences that led us into our various, you know, entrees into ministry world.
Yeah.
So that second job, so I knew that I wanted to be an investor. Went through a recruiting process for that, and ended up going to Chicago to do what's called private equity investing. And so that's, you raise a bunch of money and then you go like buy businesses, the entire business generally, and then you grow it a lot over generally 3 to 5 years. You sell it, you make a lot of money. So to give you a sense of scale, at the time, there were probably 50 investment professionals at the company. 10 of those were partners, basically, and half of them owned their own planes. So just like even kind of next level kind of wealth. There were only 3 levels at the time. It was me, associate, then VPs, and then partners. That was it. And so really? Extremely lean, ton of responsibility. This is like going from those 1 or 2 opportunities where you get to go to a meeting, like you're in every meeting, like you're having these relationships.
Yeah. And when you take over a company, are you like do you become like the CEO? Or how does it work? You hire somebody to be the CEO and you're like the head of the board?
Yeah, so there's two ways you can do it. You can either kind of buy ownership from whoever owns it and kind of keep the management team, or you can bring in a new management team. We kind of had a mixed approach depending on the company.
Depending on the management team, I'm sure.
Yeah, the performance of the business, etc.
Yeah.
Our approach was to acquire kind of a really great leader in an industry or a company that could become a leader, and then really grow it both organically by just like growing more by doing what they're doing, and then also what are called add-on acquisitions. So buying kind of the number 2 or 3 players, adding on new product capabilities, new markets, new services. And so for every kind of one big company we acquired, we added 3 to 7 kind of add-on acquisitions.
Wow.
So you're doing like a lot of stuff. And so like the senior people were in charge of going out and finding those platform companies, those big companies. And then in partnership with the management team, we'd go out and like try and add these kind of smaller or tangential or competitor companies. And so because the partners were out finding the new big companies, it was the responsibility of the associates and the VPs, including myself, to like go and execute those smaller deals. So in many cases, it was me and people like me working like day in, day out with the CFOs of these companies to like execute and go do these deals.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, I mean, a ton of responsibility, like texting, like pick up the phone, getting called randomly by the CEO, CFOs of the companies that we own to like go figure stuff out, structured deals, whatever the case was. And so we owned the company. So we were like the majority of the board of directors. We'd have occasionally independent board of director members or whatever, but like the management team would then like come and quarterly present the board presentation over the course of usually 2 days to us. And then we'd be setting strategy and kind of working with the management team to figure out like what the goal was, and then ultimately would sell the companies for hopefully more money than we bought it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And so what was that period of your life like?
It was...
Especially spiritually speaking, but in general.
Yeah. It was incredibly intense. So whereas like...
And you didn't enjoy this nearly as much. Like you said, New York, you kind of look on like fine, or you look back on fondly. Would you describe this period of your life the same way or no?
I would say that I look back on the period of time as an incredible growth period, one with a lot of benefits, but that at a higher cost.
Yeah.
And so
I remember you hating your life.
Well, yeah. So I think it's
how I would describe it.
Yeah.
As a friend.
Yeah. So like I've thought a lot about this. I was working legitimately 7 days a week, 90+ hour work weeks, like all of the time.
Yeah. It was unreal.
And it
like shit people don't think actually happens.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like people that say they work like, oh, I work 80-hour weeks. Like they don't. Most people don't. Yeah. That say that don't, but you did.
It does.
You know what I mean?
It is a real thing.
It was wild, dude.
So, I think I knew what I was getting into, and I was willingly making a exchange of value. Like I knew I had to commit all of my time, had to be the number one thing for me. I went on vacation once and ended up on like a hike in the Tetons on the top of a mountain for 3 hours with my mobile Wi-Fi device, like pulling out my laptop and being in Excel on a Zoom for 3 hours. Like at any time you need to be ready.
Wow.
Whether it's 3 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon or 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning.
And were the top dogs like living that way still, like 20, 30 years down the road? Like were they still like that in demand, or did they have a little bit more freedom at least?
Certainly more freedom.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're creating strategy. Their role is to create vision, create a thesis around where we should be investing, what companies, find the teams we should be investing behind, and then it was our job to like execute those deals. So
got it.
Certainly specials. Now they had been there and done that, all of them,
right?
Incredibly intellectually, like some of the biggest brains I've ever been around, and very smart, but had been successful because they were able to also make that trade and be good at it. Every once in a while, there was like a big peak thing where you're closing $1 billion+ deal, and like the negotiation comes down late. I've been on literal all-nighters with people, with kids in their 30s and 40s. Mm-hmm. So, every once in a while, but generally the 7 day a week stuff is not the senior guys.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah. So, but that's what I thought I was going to do. I thought it was hard, but I was doing well, and I was making a trade that I knew that I was making. And although it was coming at increasing cost physically and relationally with Sam, we'd both moved to Chicago at this point. So, we were in the same place physically and seeing each other even like less than
previously.
Yeah. There was one I was like, I promised I'd come in and like say goodnight, like, before the end of the night. We actually lived in the same building, 9 floors apart, 2 different apartments, which I now describe as one metric unit of Holy Spirit. Just enough. This is enough distance. So like, I'll stop by your apartment. Like when I come back, like say goodnight before you, whatever, go to bed. And she texted me at like 6:30 in the morning. It was like, just like, I understand if you have to work, just like don't get my hopes up. Like if you tell me you're gonna stop by, like stop by. I'm like, I will. I haven't left yet.
I was hoping to catch you before you left for work today.
Yeah. So there were days like that, but the idea was you do that for 3 years, and then the idea was to go to business school, which was in part like a reset and kind of semi-vacation, and then come back and kind of mid-level and hopefully make it to partner one day. That was the plan. And so, although it was very hard, I had a tremendous amount of responsibility, was making a tremendous amount of money, and particularly for someone who's 25, 26, and it was in the midst of that kind of the Hallow experience happened, which I can jump into unless you want.
Tell us about it.
Any other questions?
No, sir.
Yeah. So, kind of rewinding a little bit, I had started to have some like health related challenges. So like in New York and then Chicago, like I was like occasionally passing out in random places and like, blood pressure related things, which is not great.
Not at 25.
Yeah. But honestly, at the time I was like, I know what's like causing this. Like I'm not sleeping. I'm working really hard.
Probably not crushing the diet.
Work hard, play hard. Like,
exactly.
When we're out with teams, like steak dinners, drinks, whatever, get back to the hotel room at 11 p.m. and then work till 3 a.m.
Right.
Like,
yeah. Jeez.
Not as an exaggeration. So, it was like, I'm not doing great, but this is obvious. why. So it was not a mystery. So Alex, my kind of co-best friend, co-best man in his wedding, along with Brian, and now co-founder, who's been on the podcast, unfortunately, before me, which is
that's right, a tragedy,
heartbreaking.
For less time though.
Well, that's great,
and not in person.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. Well, I'll have that to sleep with.
That's right.
He had fallen away completely from his faith. I'm sure you guys went deep in his story, so you can listen to that. He had gotten really into secular meditation using an app called Headspace. Mm-hmm. Headspace and Calm are kind of the two big ones. And he was like, "Hey, man, you're like really stressed. Like, you should try meditation." And so my response to that was, if I can fix my life in 10 minutes a day, great, like for sure. Now, this search for like, I need to have some more balance was for me more a physiological question. I didn't connect it at all with like a spiritual anything missing. I'm still going to mass.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Still going to mass. Prioritized holy days. I would go into work with Ashes on Ash Wednesday, even if we were traveling. And I remember one day we were going into a management team. I got up at like 5:30, 6 o'clock. We were in Georgetown in DC. Got Ashes like first thing. Went to mass and like went into the meeting. I got some like looks from my senior guys. Like I'm doing this, so
yeah. Deal with it.
Yeah. Anyway, so I tried meditating using Headspace every day for kind of like 5 weeks, just over a month. And the way to describe the experience is that, I'm now more aware that there are some spiritual dangers of such an inward focused approach to kind of pseudo Eastern spirituality stuff. Mm-hmm. But at the time, what happened was just as soon as I created 10 minutes of silence in my day, two things happened. One, my heart rate, my resting heart rate started to go down, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But in that space of silence, all of these like small vocational questions just started to pop up out of everywhere. Like, what are you doing with your life? You ever stop to think not what you want, but what my God calling you to do? Like, is this really your purpose in life? Like all these things. I'm like, that's a big, scary set of questions. Ain't nobody got time for that. Like, I cannot get bogged down in these big existential things. I'd also been putting off marriage discernment for quite a while at this point. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I cannot deal with this crap. So I just did what you're not supposed to do.
Just gotta go.
I stopped meditating. I just went back to work all the time. Just swept it under the rug. Not to tell Alex's story because he's already told it, but he kind of had a spiritual reconversion experience because he was getting married, going through pre-Cana, and at the time was atheist agnostic. And but was like, if I'm going to jump through all these hoops to get married in the church, I might as well figure out if I actually believe in God or not.
Right.
Which is like, a good thought. He's like, well, how do I do that? So he tried the kind of intellectual argument stuff, would watch YouTube videos, Father Mike Schmitz, Bishop Barron. You were not around at the time. So
I wasn't,
unfortunately for him. So and he'd get excited again, but then he'd watch like a Sam Harris kind of new atheism kind of stuff and be confused again. He kept coming back, he's still meditating, and he's kind of religious images kind of start to enter into that space unexpectedly, namely the cross. He's like, well, that's weird. I don't really believe in God, but like, this does remind me, like I was always told growing up, you could talk to this guy, meaning God, and if you can have a personal relationship with him, then he must be real. So all right, God, I'm going to try and talk to you every day for 2 years. If you want me to know you're there, this is your window.
Right.
So, we're not supposed to put God to terms. Yep. There's a lot of pride in that approach, but it wasn't 2 days or 2 weeks or 2 months. It was 2 years. But he didn't know how to have
Which is crazy.
Which is a big...
2 years is wild.
That's a big commitment.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
It's just how ridiculous 2 years is. Yeah. It's just like nobody does that. I usually challenge people for 30 days.
Yeah.
I'm like, if you give God 30 days, I'm not saying that you can just like write him off forever, but I'm like, give it 30 days, praying every day, going to mass, go to confession if you're Catholic, try to just generally live a more moral lifestyle. And if you don't feel any different, then but I think 30 days is enough that if you truly commit to it, like fully with all of those things, you're going to at least feel better.
Yeah.
Right. You might not have like a transformative prayer experience, but you're going to at least feel better and be like, maybe there's something to this.
I've used that. I mean, you've told me about that before, and I've used
my dude said 2 years. He said, I'll do 24 of those.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, credit to him for that.
Yeah, incredible.
But he didn't know how to have the conversation. So he calls our former rector, Father Pete, who I talked about. Pete. He's like, hey, Father Pete, does the church have any like meditation stuff? Because I like meditation, but I'm looking for something Catholic to see if God's real. And Father Pete just laughs out loud on the phone and is like, Alex, I don't know how many classes you slept through while you were here, but like we've been doing this for over 2,000 years.
Right.
It's called prayer.
Yep.
You should really know what that is.
You just spend too much time with that dumb ox.
That's right. That's right. You guys been doing smoking crack. Yeah. So he's like, great, where do I get started? He talked about all this, I assume.
He did. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So he discovers all this stuff, namely Lectio Divina. Just in case anybody hasn't listened to that episode.
Father.
Then the kind of central part of this is he Googles how to pray Lectio Divina, pulls his wife's Bible off the shelf. Shout out Megan. Opens a random page. Happens to be the Gospel of Matthew, Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus gives us the Lord's Prayer, and the word that jumped out to meditate on was Hallow, from Hallowed be thy name. Had a deep, transcendent, contemplative experience, broke down into tears, knew immediately that God was real, and wanted to figure out how to love him back. So he dives deep into kind of all the contemplative mystic traditions of the church. He's reading St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross, all this stuff, Ignatian spirituality, Carmelite spirituality. Fast forward a couple Sundays, I, as the Italian of the group, would, whenever I was in the country or in the city on Sundays, would like host some dinners. It was actually back when like the last season of Game of Thrones was coming out.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Come over, cook some dinner, watch this episode. Everybody would leave, and then I'd work for another 6 hours. So,
because you just took 6 hours off on a Sunday,
right? Which is
not okay.
Big no.
Yeah.
So anyway, he was like, this is over dinner. He's like, you're Catholic. Like, how'd you learn how to pray? I was like, my mother and my grandmother taught me, things. We pray as a family before meals, before bed. Holy name, Sister Rita. Shout out Sister Rita. Father Mahoney taught me the other stuff, sacraments. He's like, all right. When's the last time you learned a new way to pray? I was like, I don't know, man. Like senior year of high school, I took Latin 1. Shout out Matt Johnson. And I had to memorize.
He was in Latin with you?
Yeah. It was our high school quarterback. So it was me and him and a bunch of freshmen. We were both seniors.
Wow.
So shout out Mr. DeMarco.
He relied on you a little bit.
Well, Mr. DeMarco actually put me in the back of my class. He said, you just read at your own pace. You tell me when you need a test. So I think I ended the year like 12 or 15 chapters out of it.
That's really funny.
Yeah. So that was pretty fun. But
he just sat at his desk.
When he had to leave, I did administer the class sometimes. Yeah, he was like a day off. Like I was his sub. So that
is wild.
That was pretty fun. Not the only class I did that for.
That adds up. Yeah.
So I was basically going to high school teaching Latin and accounting. So that was fun. Shout out Sister Christine. So incredible. A lot of shout outs. So anyway, I was like, senior year of high school, I took Latin 1. I had to memorize the Pater Noster and Ave Maria. And he's like, okay. Do you know what Lectio Divina is? I said, no. He said, do you know what the Examen is? I said, no. He said, do you know what the Rosary is? I said, yes, I know what the Rosary is. I'm like, all right. So I was like 1 for 3, not great. He's like, you should really try this stuff. And I was a little skeptical because he was the one that recommended Headspace, which like opened up Pandora's box of like stress in my life.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, this is Catholic. You're going to like it. So I started doing Lectio in the morning, Examen in the evening. And they immediately clicked Lectio, primarily, but they immediately clicked as the tools that I was missing to ask those big, scary questions of like, Lord, what do you want from my life? Like not in like some esoteric or intellectual way, but like here now in this day, these next 16, 18 hours that I'm going to be awake, like what do you want from me?
Yeah. Today? What do you want me to do?
And that was really revelatory because I never knew how to like have that type of conversation. Like I knew the rote prayers, but I didn't know how to have the listening, the meditation, what we now know you and I talk about all the time now. The Catechism describes as the questing, right, for God's will in our lives, to present the truth of the faith and ask, using our imagination, emotion, desire, like reveal your path to me. And so that was kind of revelatory to me. Eric, our third co-founder, had an experience kind of sort of similar to me. We're now friends talking on the weekends about this stuff. I'm like, man, this is awesome. Like, what are you reading? What's going on here? Alex is going super deep. He's getting ready to go to grad school, so he had some more time. He's sending us books to read, blogs to all this stuff. Brian, Abby, Francis, all these people that are now on the founding team. And we're, like, wouldn't it be awesome if instead of like memorizing all these different steps, reading all these things, closing our eyes, opening our eyes, whatever, like we could be guided in the same audio guided way that the Calm and Headspace have done, but for prayer. And Alex is a mechanical engineer. Eric is a computer science, which means Eric actually knows what he's doing, and Alex like acts like he knows what he's doing. But he did take some coding classes. He's like, well, it can't be that, or to like code a super simple like play pause button. We'll record some audio scripts of some friends doing some of this prayer stuff we've learned. And so he just built it in his spare time as like a tool for us to press play instead of like closing eyes, opening eyes, doing all this stuff. Over the course of a summer, actually really the spring, we kind of built it out. And the more time we spent doing that, for them, it was like, to 8 to 10 p.m. on the evenings. For me, it was like between 2 and 4 a.m. After work. Our friends and family were like, you're really spending a lot of time on this. Like, I'd love to check it out. Can I use it? And over the course of then the summer, we started to hear some pretty crazy experiences coming from their lives, from just like, it was literally 9 sessions. So like just committing to prayer in one of the 3 ways we had in the app. The graces that started to manifest in their lives were just insane. And so that kind of hit us in the head like a rock of like, hey guys, like instead of thinking about what is discernment, why don't you actually do some here? Why don't you think about this? And so we did some prayer on this. There was one kind of peak moment for us in my specific journey. It was October 13th in 2018. I remember that because it was my sister Bianca's birthday. Shout out Bianca.
Shout out Bianca.
And so we had like a let's spend Saturday together praying about this to see what we're supposed to do. And because of that, I forgot to wish my sister happy birthday. She called me at like 8 p.m. was like, anything you want to say to me? So I remember the day.
Bianca.
And
that sounds like Bianca.
She's great. She's
the most little sister that I know of.
She's great, and I hope she listens to this and appreciates the shout out.
You'll be both.
The odds of her making it this far into the podcast are pretty slim. Yeah. So we were getting together on a Saturday, and so we started the day off at like 7:30, 8 o'clock. 6 friends, basically 5 or 6 friends, and at Eric's parents' house in the suburbs of Chicago, and we just started off with like 45 minutes, an hour of prayer, which I had done like a total of 0 times in my life. Like get up Saturday morning with a group of friends and like spend. So
in like a house, or did you go to church, or how?
In his like parents' sitting room.
Okay.
Francis led us in what he prepared for like a summer.
He's a seminarian at the time, Francis?
Yes, he's a seminarian. Now, keep in mind, I have to work all the time. So in order to like get 7 or 8 hours on Saturday, I stayed until the office on Friday night till 5 a.m. I went home and slept for an hour and a half, and then took an hour Uber from my apartment to this place. So I show up like physically
depleted,
not thriving,
in need.
Yes. And so like we're gonna do like 45 minutes, 60 minutes of prayer led by Francis. I'm like, I might literally fall asleep.
Nobody better put you to sleep than Francis.
Exactly. Shout out Francis. So I'm like nervous. Like,
absolute stud on the sleep stories.
I'm gonna fall out of this chair.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
A very comfortable chair, beautiful, suburban home. And in those 45 minutes, I have maybe the most deep contemplative experience I've ever had of complete peace. All of my physical pain, work anxiety completely went away. And I knew in that moment, like, whatever this is, I need more of this, and I need to go help people find this. And within a couple of weeks, after we finished kind of the project we were on, I walked in on a Monday morning and quit my job. I walked to my partner's office, tried to stumble through a sentence of like, hey, so like, I've been, working really hard to, really give everything my all. And he just like interrupts after like 5 or 6 words. Like, are you quitting? I was like, yeah. And I think they thought I was going to go to a competitor. And then I was like, I'm going to go start a prayer app. So I think most people thought I had lost my mind, which in many ways, maybe I had, but like in a good way.
That's right.
Surrendered my soul, maybe would be a better way. And then by December of that, we ran a Kickstarter. Eric did a bunch of great work on the Kickstarter. And then by December, we launched in the App Store. So that was December of 2018. So that first conversation around Lectio Divina, kind of February-ish of 2018. And by December, we were in the App Store and had quit our jobs.
absolutely nuts.
The rest is history. Yeah.
I still remember being in my house in Fayetteville, North Carolina, in my apartment that I was in, and you calling me, and we were just calling, just to catch up. And you're telling me about life, and I'm like, yeah, I think I'm getting out of the Army, man. Like I got about a year left, and I'm ready to call it. And you tell me about this and about Alex's experience, and that you guys are getting ready to do this thing, and I was like, man, that sounds pretty amazing, And I was just like, that'd be cool to work with you on that someday, like if it gets to that point. But I still had, I had 15 months left in the Army and stuff, and so I wasn't even thinking really of like post-Army life or anything. But yeah, just crazy to think about what it was like back then to now, where everything's at and where we're at today. But how do you, like, you just had to describe what the last 5 years have been like, and last 5 years, what have the last 5 years been like with Hallow? But then also, like, how has the last 5 years of Hallow growth changed you? Like, how have you changed as a person throughout this journey?
Yeah, obviously there's a lot there. So to give people context, so at the time of recording, we're like 1 month away from 5-year anniversary being in the App Store. We just hit 13 million downloads. The app's been used to pray over 300 million times across 150
almost 350.
Countries. Yeah, almost 350. 7 languages. Team is mid 80s full time, over 100, including part time and contractors. Like, it's been totally, totally wild. Alex, Eric, and I talk about this. It's like, if you would have told us 5 years ago that 1,000 people would ever use the app, I'd be like, I don't know, man. That's like an insane number.
Right.
And now I think, like over 10,000 people a day download the app, which is just absolutely nuts. And glory be to God for that, because I think it's, as you've heard throughout my story, my biggest temptation is toward pride and ego and thinking like I'm the greatest. And still have a long way to go on that. But honestly, it's been the most humbling experience over the past 5 years. Each part of the journey has brought different realizations and different growth opportunities, but I think it's so clearly beyond anything that I could do or we could do. That's like so clearly God doing his will, because it's so beyond our own capabilities. Alex has this great expression. He reminds us of this all the time. It's like, if this works out, God, you're going to get all the credit. Like, we're not going to step in and say like, we're the greatest people ever, or the greatest business minds, whatever else. Like, this is going to be yours. And we're never going to get confused about that. Now, on the same side, if it fails, it's also on you. So like,
you want to get credit and responsibility. Credit and the blame.
Upside and downside.
Yeah.
We assume you will have wanted, the things that happened along the way. We're going to do our best in prudence and stewardship to like not mess it up as much as we can. I'm sure we will in a million ways. We're sinners and fallen in our nature, but like, we're going to give it our all, but like, it's in your hands either way. So that's been really freeing. Maybe a couple like step function kind of things. So, we could have like, I didn't have an income for like over a year, and I wasn't engaged yet. So slightly less crazy in that sense. But one of the nice things about being in finance before is I had a couple bonuses stocked up. So I remember that later that day, October 13th, Eric and I were kind of driving back. We split up into different groups in the afternoon. We went to the library to kind of reflect on some stuff, and Eric and I did. We were talking on the car ride back, and we're like, so like, he'd quit his job. I was about to quit mine. And we're like, so how long do you think we could do this without any income? And we were both doing the math in the car. And he was like, I think I could probably make it 3 to 3.5 years. Like, really pinching pennies and whatever. And he's like, okay, I think I could probably do 5. And if you know Eric,
he's thinking a little on $10,000 a year.
Yeah.
He was referring to 1/3 the amount of money and saying that he could make it 5 and what would take you 3 years to blow through.
Yeah. So
he's like, well, I'm pretty accustomed to sleeping on the park bench, and I only eat 1 meal a day. So
yeah,
5 years.
I'm willing to cut out most of the fat. Eric's willing to cut muscle.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's really funny.
So we were talking about it. So luckily we didn't have to go that long, but so the first part was when we kind of raised our first kind of funding round, which was in the fall of 2019. So just under a year after we launched. And so that was our first round of hiring. And that was crazy because we were trying to convince people to like leave their jobs to come work for Hallow and like their families be dependent on us. And so that was way more scary.
Going from not getting paid to that.
yeah, it's like, and we still weren't getting paid.
Right.
Because we were paying other people and didn't want to take it for ourselves. And, which is semi-technically illegal, like with the minimum wage laws or whatever. But
depriving yourselves.
Yeah. It's like, okay, well, we can all sue each other. So, but there's not going to be much to sue for. But anyway.
Should have been getting at least $15 an hour.
There you go. So hiring people was really hard. And then I think that really drove home the, like, okay, you are now not just responsible for yourselves, but for these people and their families. And we take that really seriously. So that was one thing. That was humbling. So we just raised that. We hired a little bit of a team, kind of 10, 12 people total probably. And then, COVID hit. Well, first of all, I proposed January of 2020, planned a wedding, hired these people, and then COVID hit. So both on the family side and the work side, a lot of disruption. And, in the faith world, so many people were facing so many new and unique stresses, financial, health, social, emotional, everything. Their traditional experiences of faith were disrupted. In many places, the doors of churches were literally closed. Mm-hmm. And the churches themselves were like, what do we do? We've been resistant to technological change and digital everything for so long. Like, what do we do? And so we worked really, really hard every day for months to just try and help serve both the individuals that are facing so many different challenges and the churches to try and help figure out these digital anything. And so we produced a whole bunch of new content. We produced our first kind of prayer group functionality in the app so people could come together and offer up their intentions and grow spiritually together, even though they're physically separated. We started doing kind of Instagram and Facebook live prayers, kind of building kind of social network stuff.
24-hour Easter
rosary. We did a 24-hour rosary on Easter, which I don't think we really thought of. First of all, thank you very much for participating in that.
You're welcome.
And bringing your military credentials to that kind of tactical experience. Right. We just this Easter, trying to find hope in the empty tomb in the midst of like literal shutdowns across the country, weeks into the pandemic. Or like, let's just do a rosary at the top of every hour for 24 hours. We're like, great, let's do it. We committed to it, asked a bunch of people. And then we realized, well, like, okay, now we got to actually do this. And so I think I probably did 15, 16 rosaries,
24 hours
throughout the day. Like at some point, Sam was like, are we going to eat a Sunday meal together? That's probably a reasonable thing.
Not a bad request.
1 or 2 hours off. But it was just a real opportunity to serve. And I think looking back, and maybe we'll talk about this, we pray about pretty much everything we do as a business at all stages and encourage our team to do that. There were 3 really big things we prayed about in the first kind of year, 2 at the very beginning and then 1 a little bit in. One was how to structure the business from a legal entity perspective. Another was kind of revenue model, business model perspective. And the third is whether we should raise money from investors. And going into the raise process, first of all, as business people backgrounds, going and praying about a big business decision was a incredibly nerve-wracking experience. What happens when we each go into different rooms, come back, and I'm like, well, God told me this. And Alex is like, no, God told me this.
Right.
I'm like, well, who heard God correctly?
Yeah. Who is the proper discerner?
Yeah, it's not something I know how to do.
Especially when you feel like you're all fairly new to it still.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Nobody feels like an expert. We have never had that happen. When we've all committed to pray about something, we've never had any disagreement. Now, sometimes 1 or 2 people don't hear anything and the other person has. And so we're like, okay, that's God is speaking to you on this topic or whatever. But anytime more than one person has heard a call towards something, it's always been kind of complimentary and congruous. So for this one, should we raise money? I was honestly, and I think most of us were pretty skeptical of okay, if we go raise real venture capital, venture capitalists, that puts you on a train that's really hard to get off of. You got to grow really fast. You got to keep raising money. You got to a lot of stress and expectations. And what if, tension between the mission and the business part, and will we be successful at that scale and whatever. And so I was like, I don't really think we should do this. I think just build it slow. We'll take it at our own pace. And so we went at that posture into prayer, and we came back, and all of us were pretty much like, I think God wants us to do this. And that was a pretty surprising call for me personally, because I personally did not really want to go down that path, having been an investor right immediately before.
Yeah, like I don't want to work with these people again.
Yeah, and admittedly, I was, the businesses I worked with were a little later stage, not just like an idea and an app with a couple people. But I think looking back on that, I think that part of God's plan was about being ready to be able to serve during COVID. And we had that money. We had been able to build the team so that we could serve people a couple months later when the world shut down. As we grew kind of 7x or 700% in 2020 in terms of users and activity and everything. We raised another round coming out of that and have continued to just kind of grow since then. So, I've learned a lot about kind of managing and building team. It was awesome. You were our first sales hire. Right?
That's right.
And kind of coming around that. So, I'm happy to talk about any different parts of the journey specifically. I don't want to drone on.
Yeah, no, I think one thing that I've been wanting to ask you from even going back to your time in college, right? So, and you mentioned this when you were talking about your college years, but I was wondering how it affects you now. Is you were very driven towards success and growing, in a sense, more distant from God, right? Saying, kind of neglecting the moment you had with the Chinese students in the chapel and all that kind of stuff. And did you ever have any fears about, or any consideration, I guess, when you were in college? This is a two parts of this question. Were there any considerations when you were in college that perhaps if I'm not close to God, God won't let me be as successful as I want to be? / do you consider that now, even with Hallow? Do you guys talk about that, or do you think about that even as a co-founder and obviously a top leader at Hallow? Of like, do you think that the growth and success of Hallow will be dependent on your own holiness and virtue? And just to go a little bit deeper into that, this is something I constantly wrestle with, because so often it's easy to say that, well, this is all God's, and so like nothing I do really matters. But I think it's dangerous to act as though, oh, this is just all on God, and so like my personal spiritual life and like how I live my life, etc., like doesn't really matter, right? Because I think it's easy to fall. You see this so often, I think, with parishes, schools sometimes, right? In bad situations or bad cases, you have school leaders or parish leaders that are around God a lot, but they don't really spend time with him. Yep. And it's just kind of this thing where it's like, well, this is God's, and it doesn't really matter what I do.
Yeah.
But if you read the Soul of the Apostolate, you read a lot of the saints, they believe the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
And I think that there's something to the beauty of recognizing that this is God's mission. And like you said, we're not going to do anything to inhibit what you want to create. I think what the Soul of the Apostolate and a lot of the great saints over time have tried to remind us is that one of the things we can do to inhibit God's work in this world is not be saints ourselves.
Yeah. Right?
Because there is, I think, a reality that if 3 co-founders of Hallow are saints, Hallow is going to do more than if you were not.
Yep.
Right. And you can still do great things without it. Because I'm always impressed too that like God does allow things that are very unholy to thrive.
Yep.
And succeed, right? And grow and expand. And one of my prayers always with seeking excellence was that I never wanted to grow past where I am. Right? Because I did want to outkick my coverage, and I never want to get to a point where I have more responsibility and more influence than I feel like I'm actually prepared for. And that's a tough thing to pray for, because it's like, I do want it to grow. I wanted to have more listeners or whatever. And I came to this kind of realization this year where I feel like it's been stagnant for a long time. And I'm like, man, maybe I've been stagnant for a long time.
Yeah.
But I think that it's got to be challenging to an extent with something like Hallow that is growing and seems to be taking off. Obviously due to a lot of your guys' hard work. But it's got to be somewhat intimidating to think about that and think about what role that plays. So tell me, go back to the beginning of the question. Did you think about that at all in college? And then how has that changed at all?
Yeah.
Now with Hallow?
Yeah. And I'll tie in the second part of your previous question, which I didn't answer, was how has Hallow changed me personally?
Yes. Yeah.
Which is, ties into that. First one's easy. The answer is no. I was not concerned that my success, as I defined success, was going to be either enabled or inhibited by my personal piety. I think part of the lie that I bought into was I am the captain of my own destiny.
You're in control.
And like, I work hard enough, I'm going to do the job, it's going to get done.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the lie that I believed.
Which is something almost American to that too. You know, this is something where I think like liberalism in America gets, and the idea of the American dream can get off. And it's hard because there's, again, so many examples of people who are very ungodly and very successful.
Yeah.
Right. Depending on how you define success.
Well, that I think is the key. I think how you define success is the answer. Right. Like, you know, you can be that's relative, like God permits all things, right? But all reality depends on him for its very existence. In some ways, it's not 100% on you, but generally, you can create your own success if you define success as like the dollars in your bank account. Mm-hmm. But you cannot create your own success if your success is sainthood, right? Or holiness. So, I think the definition matters there. On the Hallow side, I think you really need to believe like the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh, blessed be the name of the Lord. Mm-hmm. That being said, I've referenced earlier, I talked to Benedictine students earlier this year early this week in a leadership class. And kind of the theme of my talk was a stewardship approach to leadership. And I laid out 3 pillars, like you need 3 things to be successful in leadership. 1 is humility, 2 is silence, and 3 is hard work. And the hard work is absolutely necessary. Mm-hmm. And what I encourage people to do, what I talk to the students about, and I think is true, is the reflection on the parable of the talents, where the landowner is going away. He gives 5 gold talents to the one servant, 2 to the other, 1 to the one.
Yep. Late in Matthew, it's like Matthew 26 or something. We were just reading through it the other day.
I think that's right.
But it's one of the things that I really base Seeking Excellence off of is what are you doing with the talents?
Yeah.
But yeah.
So, quick refresher for anyone super new, like the guy, highly paraphrased, the guy with 5
Alessandro's terms
goes out and through commerce produces 5 more. The guy with 2 goes out and produces 2. The guy with 1 is scared he's going to lose it and he buries it. And the master comes back. The guy with 5 is like, look what I did. The guy with 2 is look what I did. The guy with 1 is like, I didn't lose your thing. Here's your 1 back. And he basically chastises the guy with 1.
He's like, what the F is this?
Yeah. He's like, you could have at least put this in a bank and gotten interest, right? Like you evil and wicked servant. And it goes on to say, those who have much will be given even more, and those who have little have even that taken away. And it's a very challenging to interpret, kind of, and can be taken out of context, and the wrong lessons can be drawn from that. But I think the goal of kind of leadership in the context of a company, I think in life, is like, in what way do you have the 5? To whom much is given, much is expected. Like, find where you have your gifts and really use those gifts to serve the master. It's important to realize that they're not yours. Neither the first 5, or the second 5 are yours. They're all the master's. But even being given the 5 creates an obligation in your life. And that's the way I think about Hallow. Like, we've been given an incredible and unexpected series of blessings with the size of our audience, the reach, the kind of way we support people. That is not just like hey, here's a cool like pile of fun to have and enjoy. But like, this is an obligation. You need to like help these people and serve even more people. And it's also important, I think, in like the work hard phase. So that requires the first pillar of humility, right? Like, this is not yours. Right? Humility is realizing everything is a gift. It's not like the poor in spirit point that I mentioned earlier. The hard work point is, it may have, like, if you think about those people were all coexisting at the same period of time in the same like house. The person with 5 could have looked at the person with 2 who made 2 and been like, okay, maybe I'll just make 3 and like slightly outwork the person on a relative basis. Be like, I did the best. I was given the most and I did the best. But better than other people is not the definition of your best. Like, if you were given 5, you got to produce 5. Like, you got to own 100% of the responsibility. And so I think that's how I and we think about it. Like, this is a lot that we've been given, and that requires a lot of responsibility. How that's affected me personally, I have realized that the temptations that I have when it comes to like operating on a day-to-day basis generally revolve around busyness and confusing like busyness with productivity and buying into the lie that I don't have time for prayer because I'm helping so many people pray. Like your point around like people operate in and around the church, they forget to like actually be church.
Yeah. And I say that, I talk about that a lot, and I can do it myself, right? Like I talked about how like convicted I've been that I literally am next door to a church. Like I don't know if you saw, like there's stained glass window on the other side of that window.
Yeah.
You know? And there's times where it's like, oh, I could go in and I could pray right now, or I could take some time for prayer or spiritual reading or whatever. I'm like, oh, but I got to record my podcast for the week.
Yeah.
You know? And so the time just goes away. And so that's the main thing that I'm trying to shift on is either I make time for both or I have to prioritize one that's the actual priority.
Yep.
Because I'm giving people me instead of giving people, you know, what the Lord wants me to give them because I'm not listening to him, you know? And so I think that's such a powerful thing to realize, but it is so difficult. I've started to realize as I've been on this journey for the last 3 years, and I'm sure you have too, you just kind of describing it, that like when I first was at Dynamic Catholic and I saw people doing that, I was like, this is ridiculous. How are you around the Lord, not spending time with the Lord all the time? And then over the years, I was like, man, it gets easier and easier.
It's pretty easy, yeah. Especially married kids where you got like a lot of stuff to do, which feels like good and are good things, are good responsibilities.
For sure.
Why don't you tell the story you told me that I now use all the time, but I won't claim it as my own. Not that it's
about Mama T?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's this great story of Mother Teresa when, you know, she was the rock star, a saint, called to Calcutta to serve the poorest of the poor, serving the dying and the sick there. And more sisters wanted to come join and work with her. Over time, they get more and more people coming that need their help, that are dying, that are drug addicted, alcoholics, whatever, sick. And they were just kind of overwhelmed. They're like, we just don't have enough time to do all the things we need to do. And they're obviously doing the Lord's work, right? Like really, really beautiful stuff. But they were praying a daily holy hour. And the sisters come to her and they're like, Mother, you know, this prayer time is great. We get why you wanted us to do it. And we think prayer is really important. But an hour is a lot when we have so much to do. Could we cut it back to 45, maybe even 30 minutes a day? And the story goes that Mother Teresa just got kind of quiet. And she just eventually was like, you know what? You're right. We do have a lot to do. We're overwhelmed. You guys are overworked. And 1 hour a day is no good. We better do 2 hours a day. We gotta crank it up. Because without that, we can never accomplish all the things we have to do.
Yep.
And that exact sentiment, again, like I said, I'm rereading Soul the Apostolate, and he just like reiterates that exact sentiment just like 2 pages ago from where I'm at right now. And it's just amazing. He talks about how without the interior life, we can't truly accomplish anything that's lasting, anything that's good, any fruit. That, you know, Jesus talks about in John 15, in the parable of the vine and the branches. He wants us to bear fruit that will last. And it's like, you can't do that if you don't have that prayer life, if you don't stay connected to the vine. Yeah.
I mean, that is both spiritually true and very literally true. Like, I know we have experience. Like,
yes,
the days where I don't have that time, we've both been through Exodus more than once. Exodus 90, shout out James and the team there. Like, I think
Jamie B also beat you to the podcast.
Unbelievable.
Did you know that?
Just more humility, just bigger and bigger doses of humility.
That's right.
Yeah, it's like my day is literally worse if I don't get to spend some time. Now I'm a morning person. You know, I think part of the magic of like figuring out your relationship with God is like what actually works for you. Like, although we are all called to pray without ceasing, we also have to pray in specific times, and the building of those habits are unique to each of our own schedules when it comes to our formal prayer time. I'm a morning person, and if I don't get that time in the morning, my day is worse and less productive and ends worse, and my marriage is worse. Like, it's like you feel that immediately.
Yeah, for sure.
And even knowing that, though, it's still easier to believe the lie of I don't have time. And I've just learned that lesson over and over and over again. The Hallow piece, maybe one last point on that, like how it changed me. I really didn't understand prayer as the fullness of relationship. The Catechism talks about prayer as raising our hearts and soul to God in all things. I thought of prayer as like just the words we say, and maybe occasionally the time we spend listening. but just the breadth of stuff that I've learned through Hallow, just is like learning to pray, like learning how to bring God into the very aspects of life, into fatherhood, into parenthood, into work, into the tough days, the good days, how to really rejoice well. Just all the different things. We all express and talk differently in different times, different contexts, and like building that repertoire, that language with God has been really cool.
I love it. That's awesome, man. Well, to close out, let's hit here. What is something you would tell, I think we're in this time period that we never got to talk about the one topic we were going to talk about earlier. I just realized this, but we're in this time period where a lot of people are discouraged. A lot of people in the church are frustrated, discouraged, unsure of what's going to happen. People have different, opinions on church leadership, the direction of the church here in the country and worldwide. What is kind of your word for encouragement, or what you think, the most of our audience is 18 to 34 in that young adult range. Like, what do you think is the most important thing for them to focus on, or what would be your encouragement to a young Catholic that's feeling kind of discouraged?
Yeah, I think there is many and large occasions of hope. I think if you look around the world, it's easy to get really upset and nervous and anxious about all of the discord. Are we in the end times? Like, everything's falling apart. We've lost Christendom. All the stats are down, baptisms, marriages, whatever. That being said, I think one of the realizations of kind of the lay community in today's world is like, this is our church too. Whether it's Seeking Excellence or Exodus 90 or whoever else, like, we are all responsible for the church. And if we each in our own way get to know Christ, love him, and answer our individual calls, or if it's just you and your own personal family in your life, in your school, in your parish, like, if everyone just falls in love and lives in love in their personal life, like, that is what's going to change the world. Christ went out to a couple people on boats and said, "Follow me," taught them the example of their lives, and they went on to create a church that now has 1.2 to Catholic people and 2.3 billion Christians. Like, this is not a like how to build the next Apple corporation. This is a how do you individually know and love God? And if we do that, we'll change the world. I think there's a lot of hope to be seen in all of the fruits of that already being born by the lay Catholics across the world in support of the church, right? Not in replacement of the church. None of us, though, what we do as fathers and husbands is that never going to come close to, right, what happens at the altar, right? Like, there's, but we need to support our church and our clergy in just how we live our lives in our own personal families. And so I think the hope there in part is that you don't need to go out and do something great. You don't need to go try and build the next Hallow or the next Seeking Excellence. What you need to do is ask God what he wants from you today. You better believe his plan is to bring his kingdom to earth, and he knows what he wants from you. All you got to do is ask him, and he'll tell you.
I love it. That's great stuff, man. Well, thank you. We have, I can't see how long we've been going for, but I know we've undoubtedly broken the record.
It certainly doesn't feel like a short amount of time.
Probably like threefold. We probably threefold broke the record for the longest CEXless podcast of all time. And what's crazy is I'm like, dude, we could do, like, I eventually just had to call it. Because you know what I mean? I'm like, we could do this forever. So thank you for joining me. I'm glad that we gave it a unique experience, record-breaking length in the podcast. And I also think, like, getting to that, like, Rogan 3 hours, I'm like, these guys are crazy. Lex Friedman does like 7-hour podcasts. I am not in a place where I could do that, I don't think, with anybody but a close friend. So it's been fun to get to experiment with that with you here today in person, man. So thanks for joining me.
It's an honor and a privilege.
Let's go. Awesome, man. Well, thank you all for tuning in. If you listened to today's episode, we greatly appreciate it. We hope that you, if you haven't before, checked out Hallow after my many encouragements and recommendations, then today is your day. If you made it this long, you for damn sure need to download the app. So check the link. I'll connect the link for a free trial or something to the link to this podcast. But hope you enjoyed listening to this. This is very encouraging to me. Hope it was encouraging for you. And just always remember everything that Sandro said there at the end. The most important thing that we can do is to love God, to serve God, and to grow in our prayer life with God so that we can hear his call, hear his voice, and what we're supposed to do each and every day in those small moments. Because always remember that the present is where time touches eternity. And it's in the present that God wants us to be focused on eternity and where we'll spend our time after we die. So God bless you. Go forward and be your best. God bless.